wimbleway, a wimbleway, a wimbleway, a wimbleway, a wimbleway, a wimbleway, a wimbleway. Are we starting? OBS, are we starting? Are you working today? I know you're hot, you're very hot. But please, computer, work. Please. OBS, won't you please work for me? Please. Oh, please, OBS, won't you work for me? In the attic, the attic, the historian cries tonight. Oh, please, OBS, will you work for me? Right then. It worked. It worked. That worked. It worked. It's working. Sort of. Yes, it's working. Hello everyone, welcome to the July crisis. Yes, it is the July crisis we're talking about today.
Yes, are we starting?
Ah, yes. Right then, I am pinning something at the top because currently the suggestions for October and November is live. And I would love people to go and suggest topics. Because I've already got a fair number in, but, you know, it's going to be lovely. I haven't turned on the bot yet, Montana, so in the nicest way, until the bot is open and functioning, there is no point putting questions in. So until a little orange sign appears in the corner there, please don't put questions in. Give me a second to get it working. Hello, Ploppy. Hello, everyone. How are we all doing? The heat is fun. But in good news, I have my mini fridge working. It's working next to me, but it is working, and it gives me cold iron brew, so life is good. I've got a PC one side, a fridge the other side, and a roof which is a radiator. I am just having a lovely time. Right then, the questions are now theoretically working. Let me check Discord. They're working on that, so I will press this. Questions are open. See? Little orange sign saying questions are live. So questions will now work. Look. The bot sends all sorts of messages out at various points. It doesn't mean it's necessarily working, it just sends them out. But the thing is, it sends the message out to YouTube that the bot is working, as in the bot is connected to YouTube, but that's not the bot is connected to take questions. Until I have confirmed the bot is taking questions with Discord, it's not working. The message you get about the bot on YouTube or Twitch is literally the bot saying, I found YouTube! I found Twitch! That's fun, basically. That's the fun. I'm going to get some iron brew out. While you're putting in questions, I'm going to get some iron brew out while we're starting. Hello everyone, how's everyone doing today? Yes, it's a very hot, muggy Thursday. I love Cornwall, I really do. It's beautiful. But it is hot. But in good news, as I said, I have a fridge-chilled iron brew. So life is good. Now, today's topic is a fun one, and I have to admit, I've done it like I do all alternative histories. I'm going to talk through the history, a bit about the July crisis, a bit about where the navies were in 1914, and then I'm going to go on to the naval discussion. Now, the naval discussion is an interesting one, because realistically, most of the discussion actually depends on what you think HMS Agincourt is going to be. So, if you were being escorted through this by my good friend Drac NFL, he would tell you it's going to have triple 15-inch guns and 9 of them. But if you're me, it's a modified Queen Elizabeth design, we know that. We know the programs that are going around it are all definitely ordering it small tube boilers. We know that because we know where, because we can basically work out the boilers for Courageous and Glorious come from were ordered before they were actually even existed, and were ordered for a previous program. The only program they could have been ordered for, considering the boilers for Nano Pulse come from the Revenge ships that they replace. The only boilers ordered at that time that fit the time frame are the boilers ordered for HMS Agincourt, so she's going to get small tube boilers. So you know they're aiming for a roughly 28 knot ship, because small tube boilers, sufficient quantity, they're getting it to 28 knots. Potentially more. And potentially, there are a few other things that she could come out with her. My thing is 6 18-inch guns in 3 twin turrets. That's what I've always thought she was going to end up with. Because you can, on a slightly modified Queen Elizabeth hull, and by slightly modified I mean slightly lengthened, you can fit that in. But we'll get to all that. Now, Chimera site, isn't the premise kind of silly because the Germans had decided that they had to settle affairs of Russia by 1960 in order to avoid the Russian mobilization monster? Yes and no. Okay? Yes and no. You are right because they had decided they needed to do this. They needed to deal that. But they wanted a justifiable crisis and a justifiable reason. And you have to remember the Agadir crisis. Now, people talk about diplomacy and all sorts of fun things. But realistically, there was some governments actually paying attention, France and Britain at the time, and there's a discussion as well. Basically, there is this idea put forward by some that a French foreign minister managed to get the London Stock Exchange to undermine the German government and the German finances to the extent they lost 30%. Their stock market fell by 30%, and it was a run on all their banks without involving the British government. Chat, how many of you think that did not involve the British government? How many of you think that a French foreign minister could get the London Stock Exchange to be so coordinated, so capable of undermining the German economy without involving the British government? Thank you, Jacob. 28 knots, 18-inch guns, and battleship-grade armor. She would have been a fast battleship. Yeah, it would have been a fun one. But the fact that this is myself and Drax's funnest little trip. The fact we still do a lot of study into this. Almost every archive we go to, we're looking to see if there are bits about her and stuff we can find out. Because we're trying to... It's our fun thing between us. No, just no. Various people going, no, there's no chance of that happening. None at all. The French government, no, not getting that much. So you see, that's what we're talking about. It's a bit of a fun history. It really is a bit of fun history. And thank you for the hydrate lines. I've just gulped down some iron brew, so I'll hold it for a few seconds. But yeah. It's a fun area to look at, and it is a fun area to consider because there is, as I said, there is the legacy of the Agadir crisis, so there is a legitimate point where you could go, hang on, there is a methodology they can do this. They can force people back from the brink. It's not a nice one. It needs to be carried out very quickly, and it causes horrendous damage to the German economy, but it is doable. So that is why I'm saying this is actually a possible thing to do, and we'll talk through that as we go through. I've given a couple minutes for people to join, but let's go see. So, the July crisis in 1914. We all know about the July crisis. Basically, a poor Archduke gets shot, and everyone ends up going to war. Or put it more politely, July crisis actually, of course, starts off in June, when Franz Ferdinand is the heir to Austro-Hungary, and Austro-Hungary is a weird scenario at this point. Okay, the Ottoman Empire is normally referred to as the sick man Europe. In many ways, Austro-Hungary is even more of a state. They are trying to use their navy to form their nation as a sort of national melting pot, and it's working quite well. The armies of it, both for Germany and Austro-Hungary, the navy is kind of the melting pot that they're bringing everyone together. They're trying to use as a way to bring together. The army's too separate and too sort of organised. And it's kind of a fun thing in that those nations are not in good states. This is one of the things you have to understand. When you start looking around the nations in Europe in 1914, there are a lot which are in pretty interesting domestic political states. Britain looks fine until you look at Ireland and the issues going on there. So Britain's kind of focused internally. Germany has issues between the various political factions underneath the Kaiser, and basically most of those factions have worked out the way to befuddle the Kaiser is to compliment him, tell him he's brilliant and beautiful, and while he's preening himself, he'll ignore exactly what you're doing. And then you've got France, which is a bit of a basket case, as it is. Here's the one thing. In the Agadir crisis, the actual... there was secret diplomacy going on alongside the sort of the whole financial manipulations and other things going on. And because it was publicised that the leader of France had been engaged in this diplomacy, he actually ends up getting kicked out and being kicked out of government. He was able to de-escalate a crisis and not bring about war, but that made him a bad person and a bad leader. So France is also fun. Russia is still reeling from the Russo-Japanese War. Italy... How do I put this about Italy? Italy is actually one of the more stable options. Until you realise they are stable in reference for Italy, in terms of their politics. They have a consistent politics going on, they're just not quite sure how they've got it at that point. It's quite a fun scenario to look at. It's always great when you're looking at nations and you go, okay, mine's a basket case, and I know this, but I'm going to look at you and go, how did that happen? And that's actually a phrase I use, comes from a friend of mine called Arrigo, who is actually an Italian historian, who I did my PhD alongside. And he used the phrase Italy in this period of, they have no idea why they're going in a consistent direction. They all consistently disagree, but they disagree so much they end up coming around to agreeing. So basically, Italian politics in 1914, 1913 can be best described as agreeing violently. They are shouting at each other how passionately they disagree with each other and how terrible they are while doing exactly the same thing. It's just wonderful. But yes, so the July crisis comes about. And the July crisis is literally the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne is killed. This puts the entire issue of Austro-Hungarian succession and line of succession into contention, into issues. Their emperor is old. He is described by some as an honourable old man, others as a senile old man. I remember once there was a discussion about whether or not Charles Dance should play him in a movie which they were talking about making about World War One, and the decision was Charles Dance would actually make him look too capable. Charles Dance is the exact opposite. Tyrion Lancaster is... The Emperor of Austria is no Tyrion Lancaster. He's not that alert. Matthew Killing, Italy in this period is in that one moment where any chaotic system seems to be organised. Look, there's a point when you get far enough above the chaos, far enough away from the chaos, you start to see the patterns emerging, and you start to see organisation even in the chaos. It's just on this occasion we actually can get quite a bit closer to Italy, and it's still looking quite good. Japan in this period is disturbingly quite stable as well. Yes, they have militaristic factions. No, they haven't quite reached the ego pitch they're going to reach in the 1920s. They haven't quite reached that pitch. So basically, the July crisis happens because Franz Joseph, who's the emperor, ordered Franz Ferdinand, his heir, to go attend military exercises to be held in Bosnia. It was showing the flag. It was to tour Sarajevo with his wife. It was to basically do the politics, okay? The politics you do as a member of the royal family. And that's the reality of it for him. And the trouble is, there are lots of factions. You have to remember that Europe is a mishmash of alliances and various powers. Italy technically is in alliance with Austria, Hungary, and Germany. At this point, technically they are in alliance. The Triple Alliance. The British, French, and Russians are not in an alliance. They're in an entente. Please note, what is the difference between an entente and an alliance? Functionally, not a lot. But just enough that the British claim they're not allied with the Russians, who they find really, really annoying. There is a reason why Kaiser Wilhelm is not particularly stupid to presume the British do not want to help the Russians. The British and Russians at this point are, our royal families like to call each other cousin and say nice things to each other, while the governments are looking at each other going, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you. Basically, the Russians are fairly certain the British were supporting the Japanese in beating them in the Russo-Japanese War. The British actually were just going, here, have weapons. You can pay Vickers later. And we're sitting on your decks and we're watching what's going on. We're honestly not manning any Japanese guns when their gun crews get killed. We're not doing anything like that. Yeah, that's the Anglo-Russian relations at this point. It's the kind of scenario where, honestly, with friends like that, you don't need enemies. You really don't need enemies. But it's working. And the thing is, when they're first putting together, the Austro-Hungarians, a list of demands for Franz Ferdinand getting shot, they are actually quite moderate. The initial demands from the Austro-Hungarians are not going to cause a war. But Kaiser Wilhelm thinks it should be stronger. It needs to be stronger. And there's no reaction going on in the economics. He's looking for the signs of the Agdia crisis. There's none of that happening at the moment. There's no problems going on in the banks. There's no shorting, all these things. And that's because, honestly, the British and the French aren't paying that much attention. They're both dealing with their own domestic issues. They're barely taking any notice of anything. And as the crisis worsens, the Kaiser Wilhelm issues the Austro-Hungarians with a blank check. And then basically presses them to use it. So they present some very, very stern demands, which would be intolerable for any nation to take. And they present these to Serbia, because it was Serbian separatists. Well, Bosnian Serbs. To be fair, the group that was actually organised, it includes some Bosnian Croats and others, but they were all Austro-Hungarian citizens. None of them were actually from Serbia, but still Serbia was getting the blame. Because, they're from Serbia, some of them, so therefore Serbia is responsible. It's kind of like, I don't know, if in... trying to remember. Okay, so this is a sort of more modern reference. It'd be a case of you looking at the nationalities of the Olympic bomb, the people who did this stuff to the Olympics a few years ago, and then deciding you're going to declare war on their country. There's why are you doing this? But it's not their country. They're actually born in you. They just have ethnic origin from that country. And so you're going to declare war on their ethnic origin country. It's fun. It would be like, I don't know. Let's say let's give an example today. Let's say some Quebecois decided to start a war against the Canadians, and the Canadians decided to respond by sending some demands to France. That's what we've got going on. Okay? And the French will be going. The French government going. They're your problem, not mine. Probably. But that's what we have going on. Now the thing is, though, the problem, as I've said, is that if you consider the British in 1914, what do they have going on Ireland? Oh, well, both sides are currently arming up. Both the Republican movement and the Unionists are currently arming up dramatically. Oh, the Nationalists and Unionists are arming up dramatically. There are gun-running crises, guns being found being armed. The British Army in Ireland has questionable loyalties. This is the reality of this problem. They were busy, really busy, dealing with domestic. And I did a video about this a while back when I talked to you. I did a video on the actual run-up to World War One and the events of it and talking it through. And I remember the overwhelming commentary was going, "You're telling me that the British government, basically the foreign secretary for the British government, to get the rest of the British cabinet to understand what was going on, had to stand up at a special meeting about Ireland and basically hold them all in the room whilst he talked to them and told them what was going on around the world?" Yes. Yeah, that's basically it. The Home Rule crisis has been running since 1912, but by 1914 you've got gun running. There are issues. There are lots of issues going on. Now, what you have in this scenario, and in the reality of this in this period, is that Britain's not the only one who's got that issue. It's not only Britain which has internal issues which they're looking at. The Italians have some issues going on in the south of Italy. I forget what it is exactly, but it's a political scandal which is causing problems for their politicians at the time. There again, it's southern Italy, and don't take this the wrong way, but southern Italy and saying southern Italy and scandals which are absorbing the national government's attention is kind of so constant that it is very easy to go, well, which one? The other scenarios you have going on at the moment, at this time, you have America isn't paying attention to anything that's going on there, fully contemplating their own naval period. Berlusconi springs to mind. Yeah, there are lots of issues. Southern Italy and scandals which are keeping their national government at attention is just byword for what happens. But the thing is, you even have Germany, okay? Even their politicians are focused on domestic issues. There are disputes going on in the Ruhr Valley. There are disputes going on in Eastern Prussia, and there are issues. Well, the landowning farmers and the noble houses in Eastern Prussia are causing issues. They are complaining about how they're being treated and how the railways are being organised, and there are problems. There is a small army crisis going on in both Germany and France at this point, which is always fun. Disputes over ranks. And even Russia, frankly, at this point is, well, how do I put this politely? They have their own internal issues going on because people are demanding things like, I don't know, no taxation without representation. Or, can I please have some food, please? Because before you work, I'll be able to work much better for you if you actually feed me. These are some issues. No, we're not. Well, actually, we're not getting into that. We are not getting into that. Wayne, why do you want to get me killed by Quebecois? Okay? If I occasionally go to Canada. I have friends who come from Quebec. I know how angry they are and how permanently angry they are. They are lovely people. But they literally hold down rage as a constant. Stop trying to get me killed. But then this is all complicated by the fact that Kaiser isn't the only of the world's leaders who's on holiday in June, July. Okay? It's summer holidays for most of Europe. There is large chunks of Scandinavia have shut down in this period. Large parts of Europe are on holiday. Lots of leaders are away from posts. The ones who aren't away from posts are dealing with internal crises. The ones who can get away are away. This is the Hohenzollern, the second, which is the ship he's away on. She's lovely. But is this what you want to be commanding an international crisis from in 1914? No. You don't. And yes, the alliances have got tough, and yes, there's a lot of people who are basically looking at each other with going, we need to have a war. But there are also people who don't want a war. A large number of them. And this is one of the things. When I see people going, okay, so the German army knows they have to fight a war with the Russians soon, or they can't, or they might not be able to win a war because of the reforms that are coming through. That is true. There is a paper which actually says that there is reports in the German forces. But that doesn't mean they want a war. Because whilst they have confidence in their ability to fight a war, and there are always some hotheads who are sure they'll win, the vast majority know that once you let the genie of a war out the bag, you have no control. Sorry, pardon me. War is not something you can control. War takes on a life of its own. It's action, reaction, and to be honest, it's also sometimes reaction to perception rather than action. And that is the reality of it. War is not something you can easily control and easily keep under a nice organization, a nice sort of pattern, and you can go, it will go this way. And the Germans know they have war plans that will cause trouble. It's like, when the Kaiser believes Britain won't enter the war, there are quite literally officers going around who we know at the time, because there are contemporaneous documents at the time telling them, who are basically telling the officers who are supposed to be talking with the Kaiser, but we don't have all their records put in, that if you invade Belgium, you're going to bring the British in, because Belgium literally exists because of a British strategic imperative. Belgium doesn't exist naturally. Belgium exists because the British don't want the French to have control of that part of the European coast. Literally, Belgium exists because of the British strategic fear over people controlling that part of the coast. They want it to be a small independent nation, not part of anything big, because that's the best point to try and invade Britain from. They want to make it a tripwire for anyone trying to invade Britain. Britain knows this. Basically, if you want to guarantee Britain in getting involved in a war, you threaten Belgium. If you just wanted a war with the French, the British would probably sit there for a chunk of it and go, ha 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 ha. If your navy headed into the Channel, though, goodbye, good luck, that ain't happening. So your navy can't go into the Channel, and you can't invade Belgium. Because if you do either of those two things, the Royal Navy in Britain is going to react fast and hard. They're going to do that. And the point is, you will have a war plan. Okay? Everyone will have a war plan. Because that's what militaries do. They don't sit around going, you know what, we want to react to events when they happen. We want to deal with them as they happen. Because you do not want to be drawing up lists of schedules for logistics, for all the table of needs you have for your armed forces at the last minute. You want to work it out in advance so you can war game it and work out if you really do have the appropriate logistics or if you don't. If you are going to need every single bus from London Transport. Or every single train from the Southern. What are you going to need? So everyone has war plans. Please note, we still probably do have war plans now. I'm sure, if you ask the US Armed Forces, they still have up-to-date war plans for an invasion of Canada. This is something you do. The British government, the British Armed Forces probably today have war plans for all sorts of scenarios. It's what you do, you have war plans. But just because you have a war plan doesn't mean you have to use it. So just because they're your allies doesn't mean you don't have war plans for fighting them. Look, in the 1920s and 30s, one of the things that people love to go is, oh, Britain and America were planning for war against each other. And they base it on, they had warplanes and tabletop exercises where they fought the other. And you sit there and go, so you're telling me there are two powers which by treaty are the most powerful navies in the world. The most capable navies in the world. And they exercise by wargaming as fighting each other. Yeah. I can't think why they would do that, because, you know, it's not like you're asking them about what would fighting their theoretically most dangerous opponent be. Because what is the theoretically most dangerous opponent for the Royal Navy in 1920s? It's the US Navy. For the US Navy, it's the Royal Navy. It's a case of, I don't care how that happens, but if we end up fighting them, that's going to be the biggest problem, because they are the biggest navy. We are the two biggest navies. On paper. In practice, it's always the Royal Navy for that period, because in the nicest way, US Senate will never give the US Navy enough money. So, basically, the Royal Navy, with the treaty system, this is the classic joke of the treaties, the Royal Navy accepts the treaty limits because they will build up to the treaty limits. They know that the US Congress will never give the US Navy enough money to build up to the treaty limits. So that's their entire banking on it. And they are quite open about this with the US Navy at the time. And it basically causes both to laugh quite heavily. Yes, when they offered to divide Belgium between the French and the Dutch, that was also a no from the British. Yes, Congress is fun. Congress is their greatest enemy, but leave that to one side. Really what they should do is war game the British Treasury fighting Congress and see who will be more successful. I know that's politics. I know that's a modern thing to come on, Paul, but yeah, don't. In the nicest way, there are plans. Whether it doesn't matter about the government whether there's plans. The military, the Ministry of Defence, the various armed forces, special and staffs will have plans. They will have the plans ongoing. The politicians don't write the plans. Your professionals do that. You don't have politicians. Now, the funny thing about 1914 is we often use the naval race as a good example of war. And that was the reason for war. Well, the trouble is, by 1914, the quantitative naval race had kind of been won. Now, please note, I put 5 Queen Elizabeth and I put 1 in for HMS Agincourt in there as well, because she's technically ordered as superiority as well. But she may be a 15-inch gunship, she may be an 18-inch gunship. So, theoretically, the British have ordered 18 battleships between 1912 and 1914 have been laid down. The British have laid down 18 battleships. Not battlecruisers, I'm not including any of them, just talking about the battleships, they've laid down 18. The Germans have laid down one 12-inch battleship with the coinage class, two bands, with one more of them each laid down in 1914 and 1915. So, technically, if I was going up to 1914, the Germans have laid down 4 to the British 18. So, as we all know, rule of 3, so even if the Germans managed to get all 4 out to sea, and the British only have a third of their force available, they'd still have 6 capital ships. This is HMS Revenge. This is one of those ships. So, it was kind of case of, whoomp, we've won. Okay? That's it. When people tell you that the naval race was still iron hot and it's a reason Britain goes to war in 1914, it's not. We'd won. We'd crushed them. We'd stopped them. That is the nicest way to put it. We have literally, in 3 years, laid down 18 battleships, and they have laid down 4. Plus, we've laid down battle cruisers as well in the same time period. And we're building battleships for other nations at the same time. It is an absurd overstamping that should never be forgotten, as this is how you win a naval race. It is won. The Germans no longer count. No one cares. And when people turn around and go, well, you know, the Bayerns are the German equivalent to the Queen Elizabeth. They're not. The Bayern's closest equivalent is the Revenge class. That is what they're equivalent to. The Queen Elizabeths have no equivalent. Why? Because the German budget can't afford to go for that. Why can't it go for that? Well, because the Kaiserlich Marine's budget is basically set in reference to the army. They have various laws go through. But the moment their budget goes above a certain point, they start taking money from the army's budget. Which is what the Royal Navy realised would happen when they raised the quality and number of ships enough. And that would immediately mean that the army, the German army, would step on the German Navy and go, your spending powers have been taken away. You can no longer buy any ships without our permission. Stop spending our budget. Again. It was an annihilation. And please note, while all those ships were being built in Britain, there were still yards which built battleships actually going bankrupt through lack of work. So, this is the thing. The quantitative Anglo-German naval race is over in 1914. Honestly, it's over in 1913, if the Germans are being honest. You could argue it's over in 1912. Because in 1912, the British lay down the 4 Iron Dukes and one of the Queen Elizabeths. HMS Queen Elizabeth herself. So they lay down 5 capital ships, and the Germans lay down 1. But, let's be honest, 1913 rolls in, and that's another we won 8, whoomp, and then 1914. And yes, but we could have just laid down 3 or 4, built 4 dreadnoughts at the beginning, and it would never have even been a competition, but some people were being stupid and thought they could save money. And, as we all know, that leads to the Anglo-German naval race getting as hot as it does, and all sorts of agreements having to be put together. It's just... Oh, you do sit there and look at the Liberal politicians, and it was a Liberal government who made the choice to save money by not building enough ships at the beginning, and go... You could have saved so much money, so many lives, if you just invested in enough deterrence factor then. It would have been a lot cheaper to build enough force for deterrence in the 1900s than it was to actually fight the war in the 19-teens. They won't scrap HMS Belfast, Alexander von Kazanslov. That's not going to happen. But the crap sea, but big guns. The Brits were lucky the army held us back, not the Chancery. Look, No. Because, as I said, the other thing is, the other point here with the cost, etc., and all these things is, honestly, infrastructure-wise, the Germans couldn't match it. They couldn't match the ship construction. They didn't have the yard mass, they didn't have the industrial capacity to match the British at that point. And that's the problem for them. They have options, they have things there which are capable, but they do not have the ability to match it. Now, the thing is, though, it's not just a quantitative race going on in the world. There's also a qualitative race. And this is the more interesting one for me. Because the thing is, even if the quantitative race ends 1913, 1912, and it's definitely over in 1914, the qualitative race between Britain, America, Japan, Italy, and Austria-Hungary, that is coming along. That is coming along really nicely. Really, really nicely. And why does this matter? Well, the thing is, this is where the interesting stuff happens, because whilst America is not going to get the money, I know there's the Daniels Act, when we talk about the Daniels Act in a bit, in 1916, the idea was to build a navy to match the Royal Navy by 1924. I did love it, that's the thing that's sort of, we're going to do this in 1924. That's like 2 presidential elections away. Yeah! And how many Senate elections? Yeah, we're not. House elections? Yeah, this is, and the going to have some funding is going to have to be consistent over that entire period, and the British are going to have to sit still and wait for us to catch them up. Yeah. Can't see some problems with that, but let's leave the Daniels Act to one side. That's still not till 1916, so that's beyond this point. The qualitative world race, the interesting thing is what nations are bringing in. You've got stuff like the Francisco Caracolas coming in. You've got the Erzat monarchs of the Austro-Hungarians. You have got the British bringing in their successors to what's going to be whatever Argencourt is going to be. You have the Japanese wanting to evolve the Fuzos and go forward. You have the Americans looking at 16-inch guns, the British looking at 18-inch guns and 16.5-inch guns. We know they're looking at both those. We know that the Germans are looking at 16.5-inch guns, because that's what comes up later after their 15-inch plan. It doesn't bear fruit enough. We know there are all these options petering around. We know there are people talking about 21-inch and 24-inch guns. I'm missing an A in Hungary. Oh. Yeah, me and Microsoft Office and its autocorrect are seriously gonna have fun time some point. Seriously, we are. I've got it right at every other point I put in Austria-Hungary, but this time it's just decided to make it Hungary. Right, let's correct that. Thank you for pointing that one out. There is this really interesting thing with the qualitative race as well. The qualitative race, of course, is who has the biggest, best battleship, right? The thing about it is, though, is that things like turbines are being shared between all of them. Most of them are quite a lot of them are using Parsons or John Brown turbines from the UK. And please note, what you have to remember about the John Brown turbines, okay, is that they use they get Curtiss turbines designs, and then they improve those designs, and they come out as the John Brown designs. And it's kind of like John Brown is a tuning company. Even Curtiss buys turbines back from John Brown to try and figure out how they've got that much power out of their design. You know, and John Brown are fairly happy to admit this. They go, well, you know, they're not so good at designing their own turbines. They've tried. They haven't been as good. But they're really good at tuning a design to get really good power out of it. And it's kind of a weird thing, okay? Different companies have different strengths and people have different strengths. But John Brown is a fun one on this one. And it's like, there are quite a few companies, other countries going around. The Japanese and the Americans at one point had technical teams both going through John Brown at the same time, watching this process. And they were sort of sitting there, and there is a description of the Americans and the Japanese were watching this old man ting the turbine with a hammer and listen to it. And he was explaining that he was listening for a specific sound to check it was properly tuned. And they're all watching him in rapt attention. And the British engineer who's with them is fairly certain this old man is absolutely pulling their legs, but he cannot bring it up. He is literally watching them going, you are doing this as a gag. No one actually does this. You are winding them up. But yeah. Yes, it was John Brown on the Clyde. And yeah, just remember that. You know, that's the sort of company we're talking about. But there's also things being shared like aiming systems and the systems for doing the visual aiming and the sort of arming, and ideas being discussed about fire control systems going backwards and forwards. Gun design, gun barrel design is being shared about them. One of the things, again, I love is if you consider the two sides in this race in terms of Britain and America, right? There are so many British engineers working in and including running American yards. There are also Americans working in and running British yards, including at one point John Brown, again that company, the same company which builds HMS Hood, are being run, their chief architect is an American. There are Brits going off to Italy, there are Italians in the UK, there are Japanese going everywhere and everyone going to Japan. This is a qualitative race, apparently, between these nations, which is really serious, you know. It's really serious. It's not at all just about national pride and seeing who has the biggest ship so we can stroke our ego or stroke our national equivalent of our ego. You know, that's not entirely nothing to do with that. But there's all this sort of stuff going around. It's one of the reasons why the Americans have such a good understanding of HMS Hood. There's an American involved in her construction and basically talking back home going, yeah. But also designers are across, and Stanley Goodall, one of the designers, goes across and talks about it. And this is the fun thing we have when we're talking about these. When you start talking about this qualitative race, people start going, oh, again, why are the people not getting as heated as they are in the quantitative race? And you go, because one is about national ego, one is about national security. Saying I have the biggest and best battleship, but I have like two of them, is not going to worry anyone. You have the biggest and best battleship. Wahey. We have battleships, battle cruisers, destroyers, torpedo boats. Something will get you. But saying I'm building enough battleships that I can stop you winning a war, or I can stop you, I can cause you enough casualties that you're going to be destroyed, that's a different thing. Were there Anglo-German technical personnel swaps? Not as much. There were some, but not as much. Vickers and Krupp didn't get on that well. There was actually the Austro-Hungarians again. One of the interesting things, the Germans swapped with the Austro-Hungarians, but the Austro-Hungarians prefer to swap with the Brits and come to Britain and wander around. And that's another thing. Austro-Hungary is part of that sort of network. Germany is... There is the German way. There is still quite a lot of British source of information, and there is a joke in the Admiralty that at certain points they are looking at the designs of German battleships before the German government is. But we'll leave that to one side. Yeah, the qualitative race is a really interesting one, and the tech which could have come out of it was really quite interesting. What was going on? The works that were going on in turbines, the work that were going in boilers. Honestly, if the tech race is carrying on for another 6 years, you could well see high pressure boilers of a level we're sort of seeing in World War II coming out in about 1920, in the sort of the early, probably by 1920. I would say early 1920s they'd be in general use, but they could well be in large ships, especially battle cruisers, by 1920. Yeah, they're buying all sorts of stuff. But it's useful. Japan is... Vickers is banned from Japanese Qualitative. No. Okay. Knight, I think what you're missing... Vickers, the UK, is not competing with the contracts in Japan, but that's because Vickers has the responsibility for helping run several yards in Japan, so it's not competing with their own yards. You have to remember how big the Vickers conglomerate is. They basically run the entirety of the Spanish arsenal at this point. Armstrong are also over in Japan, but they're not quite as heavily in this. They are still competing from UK and Japan. Armstrong and Vickers both have places in America as well. It's just fun. Bribery... Knight. Please. Bribery scandals. They were an issue, yes, but, scandal is just such a dirty word. But also, you think a scandal and a mere, we don't like to have the national company involved, is going to keep them out of it. You're so nice. This is not quite the same as today in terms of corporate ethics. But, yeah. So, with that all being said, what are the options for peace? Well, I think quite a few people will probably bring up the German committed to war, and, well, here is, of course, something which was later written later by Kaiser Wilhelm, but for I no longer have any doubt that it was supposedly written contemporaneously, but then seems to be edited and added in and all sorts of things later. And we no longer have any doubt that England, Russia and France have agreed among themselves, knowing that our treaty obligations compel us to support Austria, to use the Austro-Serb conflict as a pretext for waging a war of annihilation against us. Our dilemma over keeping faith with the old and honourable emperor has been exploited to create a situation which gives England the excuse she's been seeking to annihilate us with a spurious appearance of justice on the pretext that she is helping France and maintaining the well-known balance of power in Europe, i.e. playing off all the European states for her own benefit against us. Whilst you are quite right, Kaiser, that the UK has always, as its first point of diplomacy, been playing off European states against each other for her own benefit, you are completely wrong about any coordination. For there to be in coordination, the governments would have actually had to realise what was frigging going on. I'm sorry, they would have had to actually realise what was frigging going on, and they didn't. They had no clue. None whatsoever. And that is a problem. They almost all of them get caught out of sorts. They get caught out of position and going, oh, what the frick's going on? Oh, sugar! And that's the problem. Now, there are options for peace, because if the British and the French had been paying more attention, I think they'd have probably tried the Agadir crisis methodology again, because it worked in 1911. It worked 3 years previously. And let's be honest, if the stock market plunges 30% in a single day, and there's a run on banks as the public start cashing in the currency for gold, then realistically, the Germans are going to have to back down again. And that's if you did it to the Germans. If you did it to the Austro-Hungarians as well, you'd probably send them into bankruptcy. You could if you did a similar issue on Austro-Hungary, you could probably make Germany go bankrupt. And the fact is, Austro-Hungary go bankrupt. And so that's probably what they do. It'll be another crisis. And the thing is, that actually makes it really sensible to hold off for 6 years. Because if you've had that happen twice in 3 years, then sensible people are going to start going, we need to shore up our economy to defend against this, because we can't win. We can't win against this. And basically, for that to work, the British need to the British need to start paying attention, and the French need to start paying attention to what's going on a little bit earlier. The thing about the July crisis, if we really consider it, is it goes on for so long. It basically goes the whole way through July. It starts off in June and goes the whole way through July, and sort of realistically, you're at war in August. So if you want to start making these things or make twitches, you need to be doing that by about the 14th of July. So realistically, you need to the British government needs to be on the ball, and the French government needs to be on the ball about 4 weeks before they historically started paying enough attention. So that's what we're talking about. It would need to hold off to 1920. And the thing is, the beautiful thing about using the Agadir crisis as the point is that, and the methodology of the Agadir crisis is that it's reasonable, logical. It's had this act. It probably will have the same effect again. You can do it. It's got historical basis, but also it's not really going to cause a massive change in the scenery. It's not going to have its own legacy that I have to deal with from naval to... Remember, the question is, what will the navies look like? And that's what I'm going to focus on. That's what the navies look like. The British don't stop paying attention to Ireland, Lions. They don't stop paying attention to Ireland. They start paying attention to what's going on in the rest of the world. Basically, the biggest problem is that your First Lord of the Admiralty, a guy called Winston Churchill, is obsessed with the topic of home rule, and he is basically, the British usually get by because usually there are two people who pay attention to foreign policy, and what's going on in the rest of the world: the foreign secretary and the First Lord of the Admiralty. The two political heads of those two departments, and they'll tell the Prime Minister when they need to know what they're doing. But usually the Foreign Minister will go up to the First Lord of the Admiralty and go, I was trying to solve this by diplomatic means. Yeah, I think you might need to actually deploy something. Don't worry, I've already got something spooled up. It'll turn up there in a couple of days. Oh, good. That's good. We need to explain some things. You're getting adverts on YouTube every 5 minutes. Okay, thank you for telling me that. Let's go have an argument with YouTube. Okay. What are you up to, YouTube? What are you up to? You were supposed to be set to stream settings. Let's go to you. Let's see what you've done. What have you done between yourself and new OBS? What have you done, YouTube? Monetization is on. Oh, nope. I did not put you onto automatic mode. I put you onto that, and you have reset yourself onto automatic mode. Okay. Alright. That's because I was paying more attention to what was going on in the chat than I was paying more attention to you guys, wasn't it? This is the trouble. YouTube, you are needy. You are such a needy system. I wish I was getting rich from all these ads. As I explain to other people, and this is more appropriate for this point because I'm gonna now the alternate history is coming after the Shames book plug, as always the case. So if you don't like alternate history and you're still watching once this ends, why? Don't do that to me. I'm gonna answer some questions before we get there. But yeah, don't get me started on ad revenue. All right. My forgetting, Winston Churchill got obsessed with some specific idea. Never heard of that happening. Yeah, we all love Winnie Churchill. He's cool, but he does also have some issues. There again, he's human. We're all human. We all have our own issues. You know, it's one of the fun things I've got going on at the moment. Oh, by the way, I'm not sure if he's watching, but you might have noticed if you start googling me, you might find a website because Jack Ray has been very kindly setting up something which is going to make it searchable to find all the content I've put out there. So, he kindly sent me a message offering to do it, and is doing it, and I'm just sort of going, wow. Huge amount of work going into that, so very much thank you, Jack, for doing that. But it's a case of, yeah, you can now Google it and find stuff. Right, and we got some questions. I actually have one labeled Discord questions. Let's move that to make it smaller, because I'm probably near it, and the questions are still open. And we'll do that to that. So, Montana. Will the Germans build the L-20A class in this alternate history timeline? We will see when we get there. No spoilers. I'm not going to give you spoilers. We're going to wait until we get to the Germans to discuss it. Joel Fredericks. How many and what ships would be in the process of construction for foreign countries, both Germany and Britain, would be present in this alternate for 1920? Thank you, Scottish Nerd. How many would be? Probably still quite a few pottling along. Again, something I'll discuss as we go on. It's going to depend on who's building them. But if we consider this, in this timeline without World War I juking off when it does, you never know. There might be, still no spoilers, there might be China ordering things and all sorts of fun things. Brandon Larson, what would the US Navy look like in this scenario? That's literally a slide coming up in this channel. There's literally a slide coming up about that in this video. So, yeah, no spoilers. How would the Norwegian Navy look like in 1920 then? That's an interesting one. Probably, well, they would get both of those. So they would get both the monitors they're building in Britain, the ones that get used by British during World War I. So they would have them. They might have ordered more. Probably if they continue at the pace they're doing that, order some more monitors. Potentially they'll order them again from Britain, might order them from Germany, probably Britain. One of the interesting things that comes through is that Greece pays extra to order from Germany, but a lot of our countries don't want to pay extra to order from other powers because they prefer to just order from Britain, because Britain has the yard capacity for it and so deliver in timetable. Interesting enough, Greece, which orders their battleship, the Salamis, from the Germans, and we'll talk about this at some point in this video. Probably, potentially. I might save it for the Premier and Long Patrol. That's actually ordered under the auspices of a British admiral who's loaned to set up the Greek Navy. And one of the reasons he orders a German ship, it seems to be, is so he can get a very good in-depth look at the German building process. I don't know I don't think the Norwegians would order the Sverige, the class derivative, because for the Norwegians, in the nicest way, the person they're constantly considering fighting a war against is the Swedes more often than not. As much as they both work with each other, they also spend quite a lot of time planning for war against each other. So you know. In this timeline, the Greeks probably do get Salamis and the Salamis from Germany, because let's be honest, it's actually going to be built, and the Germans never considered completing it and finishing it off for themselves. They didn't want it. The Greeks wanted it. Jacob, what if the Dutch capitulated when the first Nazi boot crossed the border in World War II? So no large loss of Luftwaffe over Northern Netherlands. What would that have done for the Battle of Britain? Not much. In fact, virtually nothing. The Germans still have the issue of the fact that the downing system is set up. They still have the issue of the radar stations and the flying over the channel. The biggest problem for the Germans is if they get injured, if they get damaged, they're lost. They're captured or they're dead. If the British get damaged, they're over home territory. That's the big loss for the Germans when they're doing the Battle of Britain. Netherlands, if they have no loss in the Netherlands, it makes it slightly easier. They have slightly more resources, but it doesn't really help them much. Will fuller Admiral-class battlecruiser be built? Probably not. Probably not. We'll see what comes about. We'll talk about it. It's Grafton and Gorgon in the British service, but I'm trying to remember their Norwegian names. Joe Fredericks. Seeing by how by this point one of the three pashas would be de facto rule of the Ottoman Empire, would the Ottomans even join World War I in this scenario? We'll see. As I said, the discussion about today is what the navies would look like. I also would think that any war that started in 1920 would have to start for a different reason. And would probably start in a different way, and that's going to have an impact on who joins and why. Again, this is about the navies in the 1920s, not the politics. Status of Ireland, potentially it's probably gone to some form of dominion level. Is there still a Tsar in Russia? More than likely in 1920 if there's no World War I. Because one of the problems for the Tsar is that all their reliable troops get kind of killed fighting the Germans. So that kind of causes them trouble. And also, they've done quite a good job of expelling people who are threats, etc., Lenin, etc. They're brought back to the country by the Germans in case of Lenin. Lenin's brought back on a special train where he's not allowed to look out, and he's secured and protected by officers who will come from interesting families, etc., so that he has no contact with Germany while he's going through German territory. As for who's POTUS, well, let's see. Woodrow Wilson lives till when? But the thing is, historically, Wilson is in office till March 1921. But again, historically, one of the reasons he managed to stay in office is because his conduct with the war and all the stuff he's dealing with. In this scenario, that might be very different. So we'll see what actually happens. Who knows what happens? It's a bit too far along with no war. But it's one of those things. The politics is kind of difficult to work through. The Navy's not so. Because the Navy's are still going to be there dealing with the same jobs and dealing with the same factors which will cause their growth. The politicians are going to be dealing with the weird stuff they've got going on. Where have my questions gone? They're on the screen, but they disappeared. Would the 18-inch gun Agincourt have stronger 8-inch or above secondaries? Nope. The British don't like that. The British would keep the 6-inch. Joe Fredericks, with China in the midst of the Civil War, how reinforced would Qingdao and East Asia Squadron be in 1920? Interesting question. Because that is potentially, the Germans might either reinforce it or withdraw from it. That's their two options. But realistically, there is part of me which wonders if some of the older battlecruisers get sent out there. I would not be surprised if an older battlecruiser or two have been sent out there, because, especially the coal-fired ones. Because, let's be honest, Kaiser Wilhelm was obsessed with it as a status station. It was a status to have that force out there. Montana 67. Notice the background change. Are we in a different room today? No, it's the same room as I was for yesterday's, but different room than last week. I've already done this discussion a bit on the video about the Japanese Navy destroyers in World War I. But yeah, I'm upstairs in basically what will be eventually my train room / lounge / spare bedroom, because it's going to have a couch which folds out into a bed. And because they're going to be knocking through the wall down there soon, so I can't carry on working down there in the office down there. But yeah, And this room is really, really hot. I'm looking forward to when the solar panels are put on. That's going to reduce some of the thermal build-up in the house, because it's literally, this is a south-facing roof. And I'm not joking when I say it turns into a radiator. It has had the poodle in it, but the poodle keeps complaining as how hot it is. Knight 6 How can we, as we can be sure that probably the QE Class HMS Guardian was to be test bed for the small tube boilers in either 1515 or 2018, can we say these are for replacing the 12-inch capital ships? Not her specifically, but probably she is about the next generation. She is testing the next generation of capital ships of whether they're going to go. And the thing is, if she'd worked as we think she would have done, so we're fairly certain on the fast tube, the small tube boilers. So we're certain about 28 knots. And it basically, if you're a 28 knot battleship, do you build battlecruisers and battleships? That's the thing. Do you need both? Joe Fredericks, in this alternate 1920, how big is the Japanese shipbuilding industry? As big as it would have been historically, basically. It's as, you know, it's grown, but it's grown in lines with what they did historically. That's the way their building pace would be about the same. And with World War I starting until 1920, how big would the South American naval arms race escalate? It could go another round. It could go another round. You could actually see some of them to get delivered, because again, if Chile suddenly has their two Litores, that's two very competent capital ships. I think you could see, you know, Brazil and Argentina going, we need to change things. Wayne. Okay. When we did the defence investment plan and other things, there is a reduction in the politics rule, or the no politics rule, or the we're discussing the topic of the video rule and we're going to include some politics. That is coming straight into politics, isn't it, Wayne? I expect better from you. You're a regular on this channel. You know we're here so people can have a bit of a break from stuff like that. Thank you, Jack Ray. Thank you for memberships. Seriously? Let me just check some. Hey, by gum. Yeah, so, Ray, Wayne, you know better. Walderbros, what happens if, the advance of wartime technology does aviation? Okay, again, this is going to be the whole topic of the video that's coming out, so there's some stuff I'm going to not get into, but there's going to be a lot more tech stuff. Eventually, would the Brazilians be able to afford it though? I remember correctly, their economy took a nosedive after some trade collapse in the 1910s. Yeah, basically it does take a bit of they did have a bit of a nosedive economically. But the trouble is, there's the psychology they're getting into of if they don't have it, they're going to be taken over by the other countries. We're not getting into that, as I said. Well, bros, do navies convert to oil by 1920? Probably. And that's going to be that's probably the big change that's going to come through. Does Churchill have a job in 1920? Interestingly enough, he probably will do. But the thing is, it might not be a liberal government still. It might be a conservative government. In which case, he might be in opposition. Joe Fredericks, how distracted would Japan be by the war in China, and would it affect their participation in this World War I? Probably not that much, because they use a lot of the World War I stuff to actually be able to do some of the stuff they do in World War I in China. So basically, if they don't, they get Tsushima due to World War I, because they take it off the Germans. They take Tsingtao. I mean, so not Tsushima, Tsingtao. They get modern-day Qingdao. They take Tsingtao off the Germans. So, yeah. If World War One doesn't happen on its normal timeline, they're in trouble. What is going to secede to South Dakota in 1920s timeline? We're going to see what comes up, because I think things could be different. Because in the nicest way, I don't think you get the Daniels Act, and I'll explain why that happens. Sadu, could you see someone like Canada building a set of battlecruisers with the older gun calibers? Probably not, but I could see Canada ending up with getting a capital ship in this scenario. And would Tirpitz fall from power off 1914? Yes, he would, which probably means the Navy goes down a Holzendorf route. I know the basics of radar go back to the 1800s, 1880s sort of thing. How were Navies with us, and did they have plans? They did, and they were very unaware of it. It just hadn't got there yet. Montana 16. Is it possible to see an Iowa type from the United States by 1920 from the Bureau? Potentially, but we'll see what happens, because there's going to be some things. You have to remember... Okay, so you're thinking about the production of the ships that happen as they did happen. But think about this. A Francesco Caracola, I remember, that 28-knot, 15-inch gun ship the Italians are working in, will come into service in about 1916 in this scenario. 20 knots and 15-inch guns. Now, the British are going to respond to that, because that's going to be part of the qualitative race and all these things. So, we'll just have got through this questions, so we'll get on. I'll get on to the actual the topic we're talking about. If World War I starts on, will we have a Russian Revolution before 1920? Unlikely, Harold, because, as said, the forces of repression in Russia are still going to be strong enough and present enough to be able to hold it down. And maybe actually have time for some of the reforms to actually kick in and actually work to make it less likely. Iowa type. And, Lions. What if the Royal Navy had deployed into the North Sea for exercise in the middle of July? What effect would that have? If you've done a massive exercise of basically calling up the whole Grand Fleet, it would kind of show that the Britain is paying attention and is very well prepared for war operations. So please, calm down. That's the other thing the British could do. Remember, they'd done a fleet demonstration at Agadir as well. So there was a run on the run on German Stock Exchange, and there was also a British fleet demonstration. So they could combine it. What about us? How are you jumping from German battleships to Iowa? Not probably jumping to Iowa, but jumping to something which is 16-inch guns and fast. Yeah. Clarification on the Iowa type. 9 16-inch guns and 30 to 33 knots. Yeah, see, that's Montana's clarified it, and I'd already seen that clarification in there. Thank you, Scottish Nerd. And Montana. 16. Did a Greek get the Slavist in Germany in the timeline? Yes. Would HMS Hood fight at Jutland? I don't think HMS Hood exists in this timeline. Well, not the Hood that we know as battlecruiser. Alan Cabot, one main difference between the Bayerns and Queen Elizabeth that made the Bayern inferior to British ships. They're not necessarily inferior. Okay, that's an assumption which you're basing on the Queen Elizabeth being naturally superior. The Queen Elizabeth are a step towards building a fast battleship, and they're more expensive because of that. So they have all sorts of stuff chucked in them in terms of engines, etc., and armour shaping and the hull shaping to make them more expensive. The R's are line of battleships. So basically, that's what you should imagine. So the Bayerns are perfectly good line of battleships. They are. But they don't have the Kaiserlich Marine do not have the money to make a counterpart to the Queen Elizabeth class. They don't have that budget. So they are focusing in on building a very good line of battle 15-inch gunship. So it's equivalent to the R's. So the R's are better, actually have a better armour scheme than the Queen Elizabeth's. They do, but they're slower. And they don't have as much deck space or air space to be able to modernise, which is the advantage of Queen Elizabeth as time goes on, which is why the Queen Elizabeths are really far ahead of the R's by the time you get to World War II. Because they've got more space to be modernised. So do not think of me saying by saying that the Bayerns are equivalent to the R's, that they are inferior to the Queen Elizabeth's. One is built as a fast battleship for the fast wing of the Grand Fleet, or try to be a faster battleship to the fast wing of the Grand Fleet to stop it being turned or being T'd, and by the enemy, and the other one is built to be the line of the battleship. Night. we're already doing alternate history. You're now asking a whole nother alternate history for this video, and that's a whole other video. There is a reason I've done a link in both chats, which is pinned, to the October-November suggestions for Patreon. If you are basically asking a question, which is a whole new topic and a whole new video to start going through and answering, yeah. Harrigan, what would be operated by the Royal Navy in Weihai in 1927? Probably cruisers, probably large cruisers. Because the British got the Australia, etc. to have the capital ship out of there. What's the balance of power between the Army and Navy in Austria-Hungary? The Navy's better for bringing the nation together. The Army is the more powerful political organisation and always going to get more funding. And that's got through the questions. So let's get back to the presentation. We'll do more questions at the end. We will do more questions at the end. So there seems to be quite a lot of questions coming through. And as said, always thank you very much for liking, sharing, subscribing, supporting the channel and helping it grow. Phil Williams, 2 ads in 5 minutes. What the frigate has happened? Has YouTube tried something again? I'm going back to the live stream on the YouTube and having an argument with it. Stream settings. You should be getting them no more frequently than one every 24 minutes. And they should be between one every 24 minutes and one every 36 minutes, but everyone will get them at their own time. So I do apologise. If you're getting more than that, then that's YouTube and I'm sorry. So, let's start off with my favourite one here, because this is the spanner in the works, okay? The British are working on a fast battleship. That is what the Queen Elizabeth are going towards. That's what Tiger's going towards. Basically, the British are building towards a fast battleship from the two sides of the spectrum. From the battlecruiser side and from the battleship side, they are building towards the idea of a fast battleship. And one of the things you have to remember is they're building as fast as the technology allows. Okay, you've got to have small tube boilers with high enough boiler pressure to make them efficient enough at power generation. You can build the level of subdivision which can support battleship coverage of armour. Not just battleship armour in terms of thickness, but battleship coverage of armour. Because remember, it's not just how thick your armour is, it's how much coverage you have. Let me just do this one, just because I'm going to do this now to explain it. So, where have I got... Oh, be back in a second. Back in a second. Right. Works better when I have one of these. Does work better when I have one of these. And got to go to this. And this. So. Right then. Battleship and battlecruisers. They are a spectrum. Battlecruisers here. Battleships here. Battlecruisers, 2 words, like the Invincible class. Which are basically scaled up cruisers with capital ship guns. What do I mean by that? They have cruiser subdivision. And they might have armour which is technically as thick as a capital ship's armour, but it's not going to cover stuff. So, basically, for a dreadnought, imagine I would be in full plate armour. Imagine a heavily armoured knight. That is your dreadnought. I not just have armour, I have it covering everywhere. I am big, I'm solid, I've got probably a shield or some kind of protection, and I've probably got a giant mace or a battle axe, which I have to say is my preferred one. I also prefer the axe to the sword. Quite good at the sword, but I prefer the axe. Now, however, moving around like that, it's heavy, it's tiring, it's a lot of weight on your body the whole time. It's tiring, and that restricts your speed, etc. So maybe I take some of the armour off, okay? Maybe I wear slightly less armour. Maybe I don't carry a shield. Or maybe I do carry a shield. You know, maybe I exchange it for things like I have an open face on my helmet rather than a visor and coverage. All these things. I reduce the armour slightly down, slightly less of it. and I've used that to give myself more speed, and so I've got slightly less subdivision, and I've got slightly less coverage, but I'm still pretty much a battleship and everything else. I'm a fast battleship now. I can move. I can move really good. Then, if I'm a battle cruiser, one word, like HMS Tiger is, and remember she's the densest battle cruiser the British build, where in terms of tonnage per size. Well, then I'm probably going to reduce it a bit. I might change my armour from, covering everything to maybe have a breastplate. It's still going to be same thing, but it's just going to cover here. I'm not going to have the coverage on the legs, because I can move. Maybe just have the cover slightly on the top a bit. I want to be flexible. I want to be able to really move. I want to be able to really move and whack and manoeuvre and hold myself like that. Well, that's the thing. If I'm then a battle cruiser, I've basically changed my armour for chainmail, like the Invincible class, and that's a perfectly good coverage. It's going to give me some coverage against arrows and things, but it's not the same if I get whacked, but everyone's got chain under them anyway. And I'm really, really light. And then I can really, really manoeuvre around and deliver the big blow. Because that's the point. Basically, if you consider the difference between a battleship and a battle cruiser and the way it's supposed to fight, a battleship is going to stand there going, "You shall not pass!" and whack, and take all the blows, and go, "Toom!" and keep going back, like heavy infantry. But a battle cruiser is supposed to be more like a whack, and then whack, and so keep dodging around it and whacking. And that's the difference. That is the difference between them. Always useful to have a helmet nearby. So, the Italians, the Francesco Calacoras, are building a fast battleship. They are building something which is fast, capable, but it's very much a fast battleship. Why have you gone all the way over there? Or have I moved my chair? Probably I moved my chair. Oh, never sub. Hello. And so that's what you got to think about when you start hearing people go, "This is a battleship versus this is a fast battleship." Something like Hood. Always been brought up. It's a fast battleship. It's not. Hood is not built for slogging matches. Hood is not built to fight like that. Even with the extra armor coverage and stuff she gets built in after Jutland, she is not built for that battle. She's built for a maneuver fight. And again, that's when she gets killed. Let's be honest, those Straits, Denmark Straits, she shouldn't have been. And basically, the Denmark Straits, the fleet should have been handled like Tovey handled King George V and Rodney. You can maneuver independently. And so that's the reality of it. But if we're talking about this period, 1914, very quickly you're going to have the Francesco Calacoras in service. They're all have entered service by 1918. That's 4 8 15-inch gun, 28 knot fast battleships. Are they on the lighter end of the armor spectrum for a battleship? Yes. Do they have battleship grade subdivision? Yes. Do they have battleship grade coverage? Yes. They are fast battleships. And that is the difference. That's going to have an impact. Let's be honest, Italy's part of that qualitative race. Italy producing these are probably with continuing their destroyer construction, which was going very well, potentially getting in an aircraft carrier, because let's be honest, the people who are planning to build aircraft carriers at this point in the period are the Italians, the Japanese, and the Brits. And let's, again, qualitative race. They're the three who are working on designs and pushing them through. These ships are going to enter service. These ships are going to be coming in and are going to be looking very scary. You're basically looking at a Littorio, in many ways, in World War I level. That's the scenario. Now, this is going to have an impact on everyone. Because Italy sits in the Mediterranean, one of the Brits' most important area for where we centre our fleet at this point. To react around the world to support the Empire, we put our reaction fleet in the Mediterranean. So our reaction fleet compares itself with the Italians quite a lot. Then there's the French. This has got 28 knots, okay? I've talked about this before. If you've got a 3-knot speed advantage, you can dictate the speed and range of a battle. If you've got a 7-knot speed advantage, you can dictate and basically do circles around your opponent. Sorry, Richard's in. Yeah, Nightbot doesn't like capitals because of, well, we had some pawnbot issues a while back. But also, please remind everyone, I don't have autism. I have got several traits of autism, but I don't have enough to qualify as autistic. Instead, I have no short-term memory dyslexia. I have no functioning short-term memory. I'm a genetic dyslexic. Yay! I'm including dyslexia because it's considered a learning issue, but it's actually a part of my brain doesn't work properly. Well, hey! But also that's one of the reasons why I can't be defined as autistic, because that interferes at least with 2 of the characteristics which you'd have to be defined as autistic. We'll leave that. That's all fun things. Anyway. So, with the Italians being next to the British and the French, they're going to respond. And if they respond, then everyone else is going to. And that's the problem that happens. Once people start responding, everyone else is going to start building. So when you start asking me, is a 1920s Iowa possible? Well, if the Italians are building 28-knot ships with 15-inch guns, the British are likely to respond with their own 28-knot ships. How long are the Americans going to be able to justify keeping the standard battle line to 21 knots? This is the point. When you have Britain, Italy, Japan all going for 28-knot ships, the Americans are going to have to up their fleet, because otherwise they've got a fleet of sitting ducks, haven't they? They're great ships, they're great battleships, their standard battleships will be, well, yeah, but we're 21 knots. They can go 7 knots faster than us. They can not only dictate the range, they can dictate the angle, they can dictate the entire battle engagement, so they can always be crossing our T. So we will always be having the minimal firing pattern against their maximum firing pattern. For the artillery specialists at the time, it's going to be an absolute nightmare. So this ship, this class from Italy, which is often overlooked and forgotten in the qualitative naval race, and by people when they talk about alternate histories, is going to have the biggest impact. Because this is the benchmark that's coming in. Yes, they're all going to be in service by 1918. Yes, they take 3 to 4 years to enter service, so even the first one's not going to be in service till, what, 1916? It doesn't matter. That matters is, this is going to raise the benchmark. So basically, from this point onwards, this is also, by the way, this class in the stats pattern was one of the reasons why we hear it's the Queen Elizabeth class, and after the R's, there is a delay on the British announcing what the next class are going to be. For one thing, as I pointed out earlier, they are kind of building a lot of ships, okay? Let's be honest, they have 18 coming into service. They're not really too worried about the numbers that they've got coming in. They're all 15-inch gunships and pretty decent for quite a large chunk of them. So they're quite fine. So they can afford to be a little reticent. And there is Agincourt going through. And it's another reason why Agincourt, because of her design, etc., could well be the British basically templating out the next generation of fast battleship for their Royal Navy, because they're looking at this thing going through and they need something to blow it out the water. So the British are basically, you have to remember, what did the British do the last time the Italians started laying down a new battleship? They rushed through, built the Dreadnought, So they would have it first. It could have been a Colaborative type. It could have been a Dante type sort of ship rather than a Dreadnought style battleship. That didn't happen because the British went through and built theirs first. Once again, the Italians are laying down the next generation of battleship. Then comes in Agincourt. So this is another reason it adds to the idea of Agincourt being a 28-knot ship, is that they're getting there first. And basically, that's the thing is, if the British put in Agincourt and she has 6 18-inch guns and she's 28 knots, everyone's going to look at it and go, ouch! And they're going to look at the Italians and they're going to go, oh, great! So this is really interesting thing. If World War I doesn't happen in 1914, it's delayed by 6 years, you are seeing the battle line jump up in speed again. There is going to be no... I think in the nicest way, they're going to have to jump up to roughly 28 knots. And the reason for that is because, again, there's price points in speed. If you look at the battleships, it is really hard. When they're in between 24, 25 knots, it's really an interesting juxtaposition of they've either got a hull which can go a lot faster, but they're underpowered, or they're overpowered and they've got a hull which really can't do that speed. Usually you have certain sweet points. I've talked about this before in ship design, in terms of tonnage, in terms of shaping, in terms of power to weight. So 21 knots is a 21 knots, and the size of dreadnoughts and the Orions and these things is a sweet spot. A sweet spot. When you're jumping up, realistically, the next one above 21, 23, between 21 and 3 knots is 28 to 30 knots. Power to weight. But you're also talking, you're going to be jumping up your capital ships to roughly 40-something thousand tons. Okay? So, that then leads us to the Austro-Hungarian Navy. Now, what you have to remember about the Austro-Hungarian Navy is they're thinking about how do we fight in the Adriatic in a way that allows us to get our cruisers out into the rest of the Mediterranean. It's access to the Mediterranean from the Adriatic. So, for them, speed is not necessarily the key thing. Because their response to the Garrick trawlers as the 21 knot ships of the, Urzat monarchs. And the interesting thing is people go, well, hang on, they're completely outclassed. No, they're not. Because in the Adriatic, it's such a confined space, it doesn't matter if you can do 28 knots. There's not enough space for you to wrap around someone else. So they don't have to. They don't have to. What they do instead is they're building something which is pretty much a floating lump of steel. People are wondering where the British sometimes get some of their ideas for the N3s and other things from. Go and look at some of the Austro-Hungarian designs of capital ships. They are glorious in their ability to take punishment. Basically, the Austro-Hungarian equivalent is... I'm trying to think of it. Okay, this is probably going to get me into trouble because I'm going to say this. If you consider currently the main battle tank in the world, which is usually considered the most heavily armoured for its size, is the Merkava of the Israeli Defence Forces. It is basically a mobile lump of steel. It has all sorts of fun relationships with its axles and wheel and bearing joints because it's so heavy. The thing is, that's basically the same policy the Austro-Hungarians are taking. This ship turns up. You can keep hitting it. It's going to hit you harder. Or as hard. It's carrying 10 14-inch guns. You might have 8 15-inch guns. But the reason they've got the 10 14-inch guns is because they've got a system where they can actually maintain, with their supported systems, quite a high rate of fire with those 14-inch guns. So by 1920, they'll have all 4 of these in service. These are massively weighty opponents. You do not want to be fighting them in confined waters. They are designed, they are the warship equivalent of the opponent who's going to hug you close and squeeze the life out of you. That is their modus operandi. They are wrestlers in warship terms, okay? They want to squeeze everyone's life out of them. But if you look at the rest of their fleet, well, their destroyers are coming in. They've got some good torpedo boats and destroyers. We talked about them before. They've got some good ships coming through on that front. Again, orientated for the Adriatic, because a lot of their surface forces are orientated around the Adriatic to provide getting the cruisers out. They've got some good little cruisers to do surface raiding. And their submarine force. They're producing quite a well-balanced fleet. This is, again, one of the things when you talk about sometimes in history. So when we're talking about World War II, it's quite common for historians to go, well, the Italian fleet is actually the stronger fleet than the German fleet in the beginning of World War II, and is the strongest of the Axis forces until the IJN join, in terms of a fleet which is a balanced threat profile. The German fleet is incredibly unbalanced. It's basically, we've got some super heavy capital ships, no, not destroyers, and we've got some submarines at later point. At the beginning of World War II, they really don't have enough submarines. When we're talking about World War I, the German Navy, as I talked about before, again, has issues in that they do not have enough crew. They don't have enough cruisers. They're producing torpedo boats, not destroyers, because it's slightly cheaper and it fits the need to get a punch into outlet to offset the numerical advantage the British have. And all these things so they can build, so the Kaiserliche Marine could build enough capital ships. This is the interesting thing for them. And the Austro-Hungarians are in many ways the more balanced fleet, the more evenly balanced fleet. They are, because of the overwhelming numbers, not stronger than the German counterparts. They're not. But the Kaiserliche and Königliche Marine of the Austro-Hungarians, as they call things, Kaiserliche and Königliche? Oh, there you go. Is a very well balanced, very well organized force. It's also quite a selective force in that a lot of their people, even petty officers, have to speak multiple languages to be able to get the crews to work together. And that means they actually get smart people. They're requiring multiple languages. They're requiring technical knowledge. They become a vehicle for rising up in Austro-Hungary. And as time goes on, this is becoming more important. They are turning more and more to naval personnel to support them in operations, to come into government to be useful. And yes, they did have problems with mines, but there again, everyone has problems with mines. That is the universal issue of mines. Mines are a very capable weapon system. They always have been. And you have to get lucky and be right every single time in mine warfare. The mine only has to be lucky once, and it's caused a big problem. And that's the other reason for a lot of the issues we're talking about with mine warfare. Mine warfare, you will hear, wow, they sunk a battleship. You won't hear that was about 1,000 mines laid, and they managed to scoop up 900 of them. About 50 of them have floated off somewhere. They have no idea. 30 of them haven't ceased to work, and yeah, one of them actually went off when a ship hit. But the thing is, the ship's hit, and that's what matters, and it's virtually no risk to you when you're laying the mines. But that's why the submarine mine layers are quite so dangerous. Yep, the Monarchs were the cute pre-dreadnoughts. The replacements would be the Erzat Monarchs. Kaiserliche and Königliche Kriegsmarine. I always get the Königliche a bit wrong. I try. They were good at mine warfare, Jack. They were. That's the thing. The Austro-Hungarians were very good, but as I said, you don't hear about their successes. When the Austrians managed to defeat the mines, no one writes newspaper articles about it. No one writes a headline. It doesn't make any headlines. You have to realize the sheer number which the Italians were putting out. So this is the thing of the mine warfare. And by the way, the Austrians also were doing the mines to the Italians and were also getting their own successes that way. It's a fun thing, but it's one of those realities of naval history, is that you always hear about the failures. The successes usually don't get reported, because the successes in mine warfare are people not getting hit by mine. And their capital ships were limited by the size of their docks, but they were working on that, so that's something else. They're working on the size of the docks, and that's why I said potentially there's a ship for next class already been laid down by 1920. Now, Marine Nationale. Oh, the French. The French. Leon class. Okay, so the French have issues. Their destroyer force is having a fight constantly with their torpedo boat force about whether or not they should have a right to exist. Their submarine force spends half their life having people go, and this is the only in France you have a debate of, well, is it financially better to be building a torpedo boat or a submarine? Which represents better value for money? They do different things. Yes, they both use torpedoes. There are actually apparently, and when I say this apparently, because I've been shown articles, and they come from French newspapers, by a French historian, but I haven't gone and researched the papers myself, mainly because I don't want to be depressed by actually finding out. There are actually articles which apparently debate whether a destroyer, a torpedo boat, or a submarine is better value for money. So, this is the stuff the French Navy is dealing with. Added to that, the legacy of the Junicole and the issues that have created with metallurgy. Okay, so why does that create issues with metallurgy? Okay, so the Junicole leads to a whole load of fights over the future of ship design and over what future ships will be useful. Basically, imagine the current people talking about drones will be everything, and have them instead talk about torpedoes will be everything. And by the way, those same people who talk about drones were everything were a few years ago talking about hypersonics were where it was all going to be. Hypersonics haven't disappeared anywhere. Neither have conventional cruise missiles. My only advice and point about all this stuff is, it's all going to be around. It's all going to be there. Future warfare is not going to be, you know what, today we're only going to use drones. No, it's going to be drones, hypersonics, and cruise missiles, and if you can't deal with all three, you're going to be in trouble. But leave that to one side. These people were all going, it's torpedoes, everything's torpedoes, and mathematically, torpedoes will always win. And this means that they slow down and they're mucking up their battleship construction, their cruiser construction, and this has an impact on their large gun construction and their foundries and the metallurgy and the systems they've got working for them. And that's also one of the reasons why you find that by 1914, whenever people are talking about 15-inch and 16-inch and potentially 18-inch battleships, gun battleships, the French are talking about 13.4-inch guns. Now, let's be honest, if you're hit by a 13.4-inch shell rather than a 16-inch shell, it's still going to qualify as a pretty significant emotional event. Again, I have said this before about 15-inch and 16-inch shells. I will say this again about 13.4-inch shells. Please, anyone in the chat thinks they would prefer to be hit if they were standing on one side of a piece of 12-inch armor versus the other, by a 13.4-inch shell rather than a 16-inch shell. Do you think there's going to be it's going to make any difference to your experience? Anyone think that the 13.4-inch shell is going to have anything less of an impact on your life? No. Now the thing is, therefore we're talking about broadside weight. And broadside weight, these ships are quite good. But they are four double twin turrets, not 4 quad turrets. What do I mean by that? Well, to get their quad turrets to actually work, what they've basically done is they've taken the mechanism out of a twin turret, and they've put two of them into the same turret. So realistically, these are not quadruple turrets. They are double twin turrets. Leslie, I want to be somewhere else if that gun's hitting me. So, okay, this works. It does have fun thing in that it means that basically the turrets are divided in two, but it also means that you can take out two guns, but you can still have the other two guns working in a turret. So basically there's a theoretical thing of the turret being half disabled. And the big problem, though, is that they're 21-knot ships. So they have the firepower, but again, the French are not allied. Remember, the Italians are allied with the Austro-Hungarians and the Germans. The Italians get along well with the Brits. The Italians and the French and the Austro-Hungarians all politely agree to hate the bejesus out of each other at this point. They're literally one of the reasons why the French, while the Italians switch to the Allies, is the British basically promised them Austrian territory. But honestly, if the Germans and the Austrians had been offering enough French territory, the Italians might have gone the other way. But honestly, the Italians would probably have stayed with the Austro-Hungarians if the Brits hadn't been on the side of the French, because the Italians don't want to go to war with the Brits. They have no qualms about going to war with the French. They're quite happy. If it's the France and Russia versus Germany and Austria, they are on the side of Germany and Austria to beat up the French. They do not like the French. They are not going to fight the Brits. But the thing is, for the French, that means that when they're building their ships, they have to compare them to the Italians. Hands up everyone who thinks that a Francesco Caracola is going to be worried about a Leon class in the Mediterranean. Because whilst the Adriatic isn't big enough for them to run around, the Mediterranean is. So whilst if you did manage to catch them completely surprised, and did manage to, catch them slow and slam into them, you have a chance. But the reality is, 8 15-inch guns, okay, doesn't have quite the broadside weight, same weight as 16 13.4-inch guns by any stretch. But with a speed of 28 knots, you've got a 7-knot advantage. You can basically run circles around it. Hello, Runel. You can run circles around it, and that's a problem. That is the reality they have to deal with. And please note there's a strange thing in this period, in that the Italian shells are actually better in World War I than the French ones are for their navy. The Italian naval shells in World War I are more reliable than the French naval shells. Okay, this is just one of those weird stats which comes out and you sit there and go, what the frigate? So yeah. But then a hit can stick the turret in one position. So 2 double twins are about as survivable as 3 times 3 layout, but maybe a tad lighter. No. I'm sorry, KVG. The double twins are not lighter than the triple turret. And so, for the French, actually 6 years could allow them a lot of improvement. If you consider they've got to this point, and how hard they're working, you could probably have another 2 generations, or at least another 2 classes of ships in those 6 years built. So, it's kind of like giving them time to build up some interesting ships. They might actually get proper quadruple turrets working. That's probably on their plans, and they're possibly going to get the 15-inch guns. That was certainly on their next sort of phase of development. They may eventually buy some guns off the Brits, or buy a gun design off the Brits. They do keep talking about it and deciding not to. But there are options. And the thing is, if the French get there, and they have a ship turn up which does get to 28 knots, which they could do, they have the boiler metallurgy for it. They have good boiler designs. The Normand boilers are fairly reliable and doing fairly well. And they can always buy Parsons turbines, which is what pretty much everyone else is doing anyway. No one go look up what everyone's fast battleships are in the 1914 that are being supplied with in turbine-wise. You'll soon notice there is a pattern. It's fun. I'm getting distracted by the fact there's now a discussion going on in the chat about whether or not it's better to die by 13.4-inch fire or 16-inch fire. Either way, you're probably dead. And as I've said before, in warship terms, it usually depends on which side of the bulkhead you are. But the Marine Nationale would have those. They would be working towards improved ships. And they'd probably get there. But that means you also have to start looking at the IGN. Now, why do you have to look at the IGN? Because you might notice I haven't mentioned Russia. I haven't mentioned Russia because Russia and capital ships are an interesting process at this point. But the thing is, the Russians get most of their ideas directly at their stuff, and they're buying when they've got their own ideas, but they've got other ideas coming through from the Italians and the French. Again, Italians and French don't get on with each other, but they are regularly supplying stuff, being shared joint supplies to the Russians. In fact, I think at one point, I'm fairly sure one of the designs the Russians are looking at is a French boilers, French hull design, Italian-built British turbines, Italian fire control, and Italian basically command and control systems, and British-built turrets with Italian-built guns. The Russians really do have fun things they're looking at occasionally. But the thing is, that's also going to have an impact on the Japanese. The Japanese are working on their first draft of the 8-8 plan, which includes some very nice destroyers, the Izumus, etc., which I talked about the other day. Like, it's very horrible in this situation. Britain will determine any form of war just by saying, we'll stop Parsons, stop selling spare parts. Just remember, the German battle cruisers were supplied with their turbines by Parsons. Again, this is the thing about the Anglo-German naval race again. How hot is it? Well, the engines and boilers for their fast ships are mostly seem to be coming from the British. Yeah. One of the reasons why the Germans can't start having trouble with availability of their battle cruisers as World War I goes on is because they run out of spare parts. It's a fun life. Now, pre-World War I, you've got the Fusos, and the plan for after them is the improved Fusos. And basically, the Japanese are working on a plan, their 1910 plan of the Haki Kantai, the 8-8 fleet, is that they will have a force of 8 battleships, 8 battlecruisers, all built in Japan, which will all be less than 8 years old. This means in any 2-year period, they have got to have 4 ships under construction. So the thing is, if you're dealing with 1914 to 1920, you have 6 years. That's 12 capital ships they'll have built in that time period. They could well have completed the 8-8 plan. It starts in 1910. They wanted to have it complete roughly by 1920. So they could have completed the 8-8 plan by then. They could have 8 battle cruisers. They could have 8 battleships. They could also have fast battleships, because they're looking at those designs. And again, they're going to be looking at the Italian design and going, hello, we want some of that. They were looking at the Italian design and thinking they wanted some of that. And the British are doing that as well. Now, before you start saying unaffordable, please remember, there is the pre-World War I Japanese economy, the post-World War I Japanese economy, and the end of the interwar period, 1930s Japanese economy, and the end of World War II Japanese economy. The pre-World War I Japanese economy could probably afford to maintain this kind of fleet. Why? So, here is the dirty little secret you have going on. At the point we're talking about pre-World War I, and with this period of competition, whilst there is a lot of competition, because there actually hasn't been bloodshed, there are not a lot of rules in place limiting that competition. There's a lot of commerce going on. Also, without getting Tsingtao, which is a useful logistical hub for some of their operations in China, and without the rest of the world really worrying as much about China, because let's be honest, China is, at this point, has the Germans in it, has lots of people in it, who are all trying to carve up their own territories in China, and it's kind of more of a balance in terms of spheres of influence. Honestly, the Japanese economy is probably doing slightly better. And as H.S. Verdina sort of has pointed out, the Japanese at this point are getting heavily into the British Empire in terms of the mercantile side of the British Empire, the economic and commerce part. Basically, Japan has become British Empire plus. America is also sort of in that sphere, as is Italy. What does that mean? That means that as long as they play by the game and are prepared to help Britain maintain control of its empire and maintain its presence in the world, they will economically never run into too much trouble. The British will make sure of it. At this point, the British can. Okay? And how can the British do this? Are they massively rich? Yes, they are. But the biggest thing the British are, at this point, is massively wealthy in terms of commerce logistics. Okay? There are points in this period when Britain controls not just the vast majority of the world's mercantile traffic, the overwhelming majority of the world's mercantile traffic. It is either British flagged and British owned, which makes up a tremendously large amount of it. In some categories, we provide 80-something% of the merchant ships that fill those roles. But then you start adding in the shipping insurance, which is mostly agreed through Lloyd's system in London. And you find that we're providing the insurance for even more of the world's trade. And then the chartering companies are even more prevalent, and they control even more ships. I.e., the vast majority of the Norwegians' whaling fleets are actually sort of run through British companies. And then you start to get the whole scenario going on once you get onto the fact that most of the world depends at this point still, and for a conceivable period for quite a while afterwards, because let's be honest, no one without a war is going to invest in the infrastructure other than potentially the British. They depend on the coal of British ports and British stations. And the British, who are probably going to transition to an oil-based fleet, and are in the process of starting that transition at this point, are going to set up the worldwide oil stations, which are going to be supplying the oil for ships. So, that is the reality. And for the Japanese, for the Americans, for the Italians, so they want to trade with the world, having access to the British trade network allows them access to the world. Now, you have to remember, the Americans post-World War I have built up a huge number of ships which are diesel-powered and can cover enough fuel, diesel and oil-powered, then carry enough fuel, they can go all the way to their destination and back to America and then have to refuel. That's even post-World War I they've got those. That's when the Americans' mercantile fleet starts really taking off. So that's post-World War I build-up. That's not going to be funded by the US government pre-World War I. I'm sorry, it won't be. So, the Japanese probably can afford it. Are we talking yeah, they're going to get the Yamatos? No. Are we talking about the size of ships and growth that you have at the end of World War I? Probably not. It's going to be more graduated, which is also going to make the cost more affordable, because if you're going up by generation. So basically, think of the last generation of ships they build are probably going to be the ones which are the fast battleships. They are going to churn out their battleships, their battle cruisers, their probably battleships again, and then probably fast battleships. And they're building up destroyers. They're building up submarines. Now, the other interesting thing about the Japanese, of course, is you have to remember the Japanese in World War I, in 1914, launched the first ever naval aviation strike. Naval airstrike. It's on Tsingtao. They attacked German ships and German facilities in Tsingtao from a seaplane carrier, using seaplanes. The Japanese are pushing on the carrier front. The Japanese are working towards the carrier front. There is a very real scenario where the Japanese race in and get a carrier first before everyone else in the world. They're unlikely to. Why? Because the British will do the same to them as they're doing to the Italians with the battleships. The Royal Navy, British government, will not let someone get there first. It's ego, it's self-image, it's all sorts of reasons why, but they won't. The British government will literally bend over backwards. They will open up the checkbook. They will disregard every single sense of sensible financial prudence to make sure no one else gets there first. So I think the Japanese probably push on that because why are they interested in it? Because of reconnaissance and information. They're looking at it as a strike capability, but basically the big reason why the Japanese are obsessed with naval aviation is reconnaissance. It's information. Because of their own experience from Tsushima and the campaign around Tsushima, where they were tracking the Russians and they were trying to make sure they were positioned for them. Because again, how they will win a battle is by being in the right place at the right time. That's how they maximize their capability. Remember, the whole point of the Japanese is a deterrent risk fleet. They want to be powerful enough that no one wants to come and fight them because they're going to have to bring their whole fleet to do it. And that's going to be expensive. They're far enough away from other people that other people aren't going to feel threatened by this. But that only works if they can pick when to fight and make sure all their whole fleet's going to be there. Which means they need information about where you are so they can do that. It's fun. Which leads us to the US Navy. Everyone's doing well, thank you, ship. Oh! For those who don't know, there's a friend of this channel called Thunder Chaser Gaming. He likes to do videos where sometimes he takes some of the ideas I put in alternate history and actually builds the fleets out and does the battles. And he's currently he's live streaming on Twitch currently. I probably shouldn't announce it when I'm live, that he is live as well. I shouldn't be splitting the view. But if you haven't signed up to follow him, if you don't know about him, please go track him down. I think you'll enjoy what he does. Don't worry, ship. No, I'm not. I don't mind a name. I'm not going to pronounce it all because I've got little cousins watching and I don't want to be beaten up by the big cousins. But I don't mind your name. As long as you realise that I have my little cousins watching And the big cousins, I'm the only boy in 40. I am outnumbered, and there is no chance of me winning that fight, okay? I am outvoted. I am outnumbered. I can try and outrun them, but I also know how to drive. So I'm careful what I say because of that. Now, the US Navy are already experiencing the argument that historically led to the 1960 Daniels Plan, and they aimed to match the Royal Navy by 1924. But in this scenario, the Royal Navy have built all 8 R-class and whatever the 6 Queen Elizabeth class have been. So that's upped the costs a bit. That's up the cost quite a chunk. Now the thing is, the US Navy is getting more funding and deserves more funding. No one disagrees. They have a massive coastline. Their defensive debt for a lot of their country is the Atlantic and the Pacific. They have interests in the Far East. They need a Navy. But you also then look at what they're actually doing. Okay? The lessons of World War I really hammer in the value and firepower of a Navy. But in 1914, they only lay down 1 battleship, which was the Arizona, which was not Arizona class, was she? Why have I lost? I'm sure she was 10. She was a Pennsylvania class, yeah. She was a Pennsylvania class. But she's the only one laid down in 1914. They only lay her down. Excuse me. Oh, you annoying thing. Okay, Microsoft, you and I are going to have a fight at some point. I'm going to challenge you to a duel. I don't know how I'm going to do it. Does anyone know how you challenge Microsoft to a duel? I need to take them out and have a fight over what Copilot keeps trying to do. Every time I disable it, it seems to come back every update, and I have to go disable it again. And it has bright ideas, which are really annoying. And apparently that was a Copilot edit I missed. Right. Use Linux. That's tempting, but 2 of the universities I work with really can't deal with anything other than Microsoft Word and Microsoft PowerPoint. But leave that to one side. We'll get there at some point. But no. So historically they've laid down Arizona. They laid down 3 more ships in 1915, 1 in 1916, California, and 2 in 1917, and then none in 1918, 2 in 1919, and 1 in 1920. So realistically, and I mean this in the nicest way, they're doing that while there is a frigating war on. They're actually part of the war for quite a chunk of that. So, yeah. The 1916 Daniels Plan is a plan to match the Royal Navy within 8 years by 1924. There is not much chance of them getting there. There really isn't, even in 1916. There's no, with Congress, the amount of funding they're putting out, that's not happening. Because even after the Daniels Plan comes in, which is to match the Royal Navy by 1924, they lay down 5 ships by 1920. That's not the way you're going to match the Royal Navy. Admittedly, they have the 1922 Naval Treaty, Washington Naval Treaty, but, you know, things ain't always spiffy. So, they're short destroyers. I've talked about this before. To get funding for destroyer numbers, they basically have to be in war, and the admiral who's in charge of the destroyers in Ireland has to be screaming at Congress a lot. There is a reason he doesn't get promoted as he should. There is a reason Sims doesn't get the treatment he should do. And it's probably because he does a lot of fighting for destroyers. And this is a thing which you're going to have coming up. The Congress really isn't giving the US Navy a balanced funding. They have no cruisers. They have virtually no cruisers coming are being built or organised, and they're trying to look at them, but they're not getting anything. So honestly, if World War I holds off to 1920, I don't see the US Navy being in that great a position. I see them historically like that. There might even be a Daniels plan that Joseph Daniels might have put in an act. There might be a thing of they were going to be equal to the Royal Navy by 1924. But the trouble is, they're also going to have to restart a lot of their building. Because, again, if we look at the standard battleships and their great ships, could you really be laying down, as they did historically, a New Mexico, which can do 21 knots with 12 14-inch guns, when a Francisco Caracola and possibly an Agincourt are in service which can do 28 knots? Yes, you go, it's got 12 14-inch guns! Agincourt has 6 18-inch guns, perhaps. But it's got 12 14-inch guns. It's got the firepower. I'm not disagreeing. It's got the firepower. The Pennsylvania class before it, which we're looking at, we're looking at Arizona here. That has 12 14-inch guns. They have the firepower, but they're 21 knots. In a world where ships are doing 28 knots, they're going to have to change. They're going to have to change. Because they are building a fleet which doesn't work. In fact, what's going to be in front is going to be Harold Tillman. Okay? Tillman is going to sit there and go, but actually, it's Benjamin Tillman, isn't it? Harold Tillman was a different person. Benjamin Tillman is going to be sitting there going, I've got these Tillman battleships, these massive ships. Great. Great ideas. They're building them fast now. They've still got firepower, but they're fast now. And this is the problem. The Americans actually have to stop their building program, and will have to get a whole new set of ships re-engineered. And that's going to have time. Lions, could you get Agincourt to have 8 18-inch guns? Wait a second. Now, that's a problem. That is a real problem. If the Americans are in that scenario, they're still building good destroyers. They're iterating on them, but they're not going to have that many destroyers. They never do. We talked about in a destroyer video this year. Their submarine force, again, isn't getting funding. Their cruiser, no funding. And now their capital ships, they need to start again. The real problem for the US Navy in that scenario is there enough people who are budget hawks going around that they're in trouble. They are in trouble. That's going to have the impact. They're going to have to redesign them. Yes, there is a chance you can look at the things and you can go, well, the New Mexico class, you've already built one of those, maybe you do build the next ones. But the Tennessees, they're going to have to be faster than 21 knots. And remember, they are electric motors. They are electric propulsion to Tennessees. Colorado's, again, turbo-electric propulsion. Again, they're armed with 8 16-inch guns, but again, they're 21-knot ships. I do not see how the... And this, again, Please don't. I'm not saying it's beyond the capacity of the Americans to design 28 knot ships. No, they can do it. It's just going to be budget and getting the government to agree to it, because, again, as we talked about before, the guns and the engines are the expensive thing. The steel, the armor, the hull, that's cheap. Guns and engines, they're the expensive bits of building a battleship or a battle cruiser. And the more you want in terms of power from the engines, the more powerful, the faster you want your ship to go, the more expensive it gets. But it's not beyond the reality of it that to increase the Colorado design to a 28 knot design, you would be having to double the budget. Because of design changes you're going to have to make to the hull, length, growth it's going to have, crew it's going to have, and the engines and systems you're going to have to buy. And yes, you have got Japan, you've got South America, you've got all these nations building ships. But the thing is, America doesn't build ships against other nations. They build ships, in many ways, for their own needs. Now, the reality is they are probably building a bit against Japan, but again, if Japan is pushing up the speed, and Japan is, it's one thing if we consider the Fuso class. Lovely ships. 23 knot ships. These days are 23 knot ships. The Japanese are already pushing their battle line to be faster than the American battle line by a couple of knots. The Nagatos, when they're built between 1970 and 1921, historically, they're 21 knot ships. 26 knot ships, 26 and a half knot ships. Sorry, they are... Don't get me started on where the 21 comes from. But that's the reality of them. The Japanese are quite happy to be building fast. Because again, it serves their needs. Because, as I've said before, what the Japanese want as a scenario is that they can have their whole fleet together. So you have to basically bring your whole fleet, so it has to be funder on funder. Because they know, let's be honest, if the Japanese have 16 dreadnought-style capital ships, doesn't matter if they're 8 battlecruisers, 8 battleships, or whatever. If you go 16, how many nations can take out a force to the Far East, to where Japan is, that is going to be large enough to have a comfortable superiority enough to win against that? That's reality. And Jack G, you are right. Americans do like big guns and powerful engines. You are completely right. Americans do. American Congress doesn't like paying for big guns and expensive and massive engines. Jack G, again, you're using World War II and the modernized ones from the 1930s. Look at we're talking about the 1920s ones. The 1910s. And so, this is what they look like in this period. They're not top heavy at this point, Jack G. You're talking about the later ones. We're talking about the 1910s versions. So, I agree with you when you're talking about some of the later modernizations and modifications of things that happened with the Great Pagoda Mast and other things they put in the interwar years. But in the ones we're dealing with at this point, they are not top heavy. And they are not turret farms with questionable armor for their period. So again, you have to be very cautious when we're talking about World War I versus World War II. Because a lot of nations have a lot of reputations which come out of World War II, and they might not be the case for them in World War I. So for the US Navy, there are issues. There are a lot of issues. Frankly, I see them having to stop and actually build stuff, but it's going to be another political fight. Which means you possibly get 2 years where there's no construction. You possibly get paused construction. Because there we go, some going, well, is there any point in completing the ships we're building and paying the rest of the money for them? Should we just scrap them because they're useless already, because they can't go fast enough? Yes, there's always at least one or two prima donnas who do that. And then there's going to go on to go, do we need to match them? Surely our ships are sufficiently powerful that they do not need the speed. And there's a load of US Navy admirals going, you want to kill us all? They're doing 28 knots and I'm doing 21. They'd be doing frigating circles. And the thing is, we haven't got into the other thing that's going to be going on at the same time, because there's the British who like to keep putting up the guns in 1.5-inch increments. And this is going to be the other thing feeding into this home. And by the way, that is what an 18-inch gun battleship based on a Queen Elizabeth style development with 6-inch casemates and 4-inch secondary turrets looks like. Using your Ultimate Admiral Dreadnought. Yeah. I worked it out. It comes in at about 50,000 tons. Which UAD doesn't really like, but it works. Now, the thing is, if we consider the British history in this period, between 1905 and 1909, they built 10 battleships and they were 12-inch gunships. That was when they were trying to deter by being nice. When in 1909 to 1912 they decide they're going to have to actually be a bit tougher to actually win this naval race, they go for 12 13.5-inch gunships. Between 1912 and 1914, they build 13, potentially 14, remember Agincourt, which are 15-inch gunships. We know they have 16.5-inch gun programs which are about to deliver, and 18-inch gun programs which they're working on. We know the 18-inch gun actually does get into service on HMS Furious when this has been cut down, and a few other monsters during World War I. But please note that's when it's been cut down. It was an 18. It was probably going to be an 18-inch 45. We're experimenting with triple turrets. We are. I will admit that. I don't think they don't come into. They're being built by Vickers for other people, not for the Royal Navy. The Royal Navy prefers to go up. The Royal Navy prefers, instead of putting a triple turret, to go up a gun caliber. So that's why they've been going up gun calibers quite regularly. So you can basically go, right then, so for the 18 and 16.5-inch guns are coming in 1914 to 1917, and probably it's going to be another 12 battleships. Probably it's going to be 12 in that period, because that sort of fits with what the British are planning to build and normally build in historically. When we go back to pre-dreadnoughts, etc., that would sort of fit. 12 in sort of that sort of period would fit as the British standard construction. And it would be 12 again of the 21-inch and 18-inch. And this is when you start to get into real problems for a lot of other powers. Because you want to build ships fast, they're going to be expensive that way. You want to build ships with bigger guns, you're going to have to put in the development research to prevent those, make those big guns, which is all going to cost money. To my mind, the qualitative race is never really won or lost, but the odds are you actually get people producing less ships. Again, the British will be probably a bit of an exception to that rule, but there's a reason they're exception to that rule. In that they are probably going to start farming out some of their capital ships to the Dominions as they come in. So they're going to spread them out around the Empire, and so they don't have to worry about them. That also helps with getting infrastructure invested in and built in the wider Dominion to support the Navy. You give them a ship which they have to build the infrastructure for. Because no one wants ownership and then not be able to maintain it, because then they look like they're idiots. Like they have ID-10 forms on a regular basis. Current Royal Navy and the British government is a good example of this. Now, yeah, there's a reason I put 21-inch and 18-inch, because the British actually worked out already that 19.5-inch was going to be kind of like 10-inch. There was no point in it. It was... Look, the point about the 10-inch is that you get the same rate of fire out of a 12-inch and a 14-inch gun but it costs pretty much as much to support as a 12-inch. A 9.2-inch has a far greater rate of fire and almost as much of an impact as a 10-inch. So that's why 10-inch tends to get, as a gun figure, tends to get ignored. The same mathematically works out when we're talking about between 19 and 20 inches. And basically 21-inch becomes your equivalent of 12-inch. So 9 inches bigger. Now the thing is, if the British are doing this, everyone else is going to have to do this to an extent as well. Everyone else is going to have to jump up. Why would the British want this? 21-inch guns are going to be an absolute nightmare to reload. They're going to have systems as mechanized as they can do. I can see already people are doing in chat automated. No, mechanized. Mechanized. I'm not sure why I have it writing on Twitch as the Women's Institute delayed by 6 years when it's World War I delayed by 6 years. But the thing is, this is the reality of it. It's going to be upgraded, it's going to be efficient, but also, I don't expect a lot of them to be it. I see 21-inch ships as being status symbols. Your probable meat of your battle fleet is going to be 18 and 16.5-inch ships in this period, because, let's be honest, 18-inch guns have some stonking hitting power. 16.5-inch guns are the point at which, if you consider the sort of the 14 to 16-inch caliber range and their rate of fire, 16.5-inch is the largest caliber you can maintain that rate of fire, and 16.5-inch is what the British were working on. They had a 16.5-inch 45 coming through. So 6.5-inch is probably there. And my suspicion is, again, it's part of the method of trying to get a fast battleship. Because with the existing technology, can you get your 18-inch gun ship? Or can you get something which has got 16.5-inch guns? And potentially you can get something which has 12 16.5-inch guns. On the same tonnage. Which one works out as better? Which one's the better killing machine? So this is going to be the question which the British are going to be working through. And the British are going to be working through this. Because again, if you don't have the effect on the British of the quantitative race going on, so you don't have the quantity race, they can afford to concentrate on the technology. And they will do. Shamelessly. The British will aim to have the biggest and the best. And they'll probably be pushing for the aircraft carrier as well. Again, why? Because look at the position of funding for the Army versus the Navy. Even when we're talking about naval aviation versus land-based aviation, the moment the Navy has a Navy wing, the moment the Navy has the Royal Naval Air Service, the moment they have the separate air arm, the funding for the air arm, the Navy puts in the air arm, goes way up. They have money, but they also have the technology, the industrial contacts. They know, they basically treat the aircraft like flying destroyers in how they run them. Now, but the 21-inch guns are going to come about. Why? Status. You know, in the nicest way, we know the Americans are coming in with 16-inch guns. The British are not going to be smaller than the Americans because they're going to want. So they're going to want to have the 16.5-inch or 18-inch service. If they put in an 18-inch gun service into service, do you think the Americans are going to be happy with the status of having smaller guns than the Brits? Remember, these are the people who developed the 14-inch gun to overtake the 13.5-inch gun, and the 16-inch gun comes in to overtake the 15-inch gun. So the British have 18-inch guns in service. What do you think the Americans are going to make? It's going to be somewhere in the 19-20-inch range, isn't it? It's going to be somewhere there. They're going to go for that. So the British will be on 21-inch. And Jack G, everyone is saying that 16-inch, 16.5-inch is the optimal range. They are. I'm not disagreeing with you. But again, gun size is the replacement for nations for something else. It's standing to make you really feel like a leader of a powerful country. That you can literally fit human beings inside your guns and launch them. Now, Montana 67, if the British go 21 inch, the Americans will go carriers. They're probably all going carriers at this point. But remember, historically, carriers are great once aircraft engines get to the point at which they are dense enough in power they can actually carry a useful load. Think about in the period we're talking about where they've got 18-inch and 21-inch shells. Imagine the deck armor you're putting on ships to deal with the penetrative shells coming from, shells coming from above. Even before you get the impact of aircraft and development of aircraft, think about it. Think about what you're armouring these ships about to. So, these are going to be fast ships, because they're all going to be 28 knot plus, and they're going to be heavily armed ships. You are quite right, Walter Brodus, but it has ever been so with human governments and battleships. The engineering challenges are going to be absolutely beautiful, Wayne. But the point is, and I say this quite confidently, in 1914-15, when Jackie Fisher is asking Vickers and Ellswick and various other armaments manufacturers in the UK, what is the biggest gun they can foresee building, they are talking a lot bigger than 21 inches. And they are all talking about already looking into ordering the mechanisms and systems to allow them to make it. Some of them were talking as big as 24-inch guns. Think about how big the ship is. Again, aircraft carriers are going to come in. And don't get me wrong, aircraft carriers are going to come in. The Royal Navy's going to put them in. Spotters, air defense, all these things are roles. But anti-ship requires you get the engines up to a certain level, so that's going to take time, especially without the war. World War I causes there to be a lot of rapid development and investment in what are basically small petrol engines. And a lot of ideas get turned into reality. They're ideas, but they're not turned into reality until we get into sort of further along. And that's the usual thing. The usual point I make about world wars, is world wars are not periods when you get a lot of money put into research to develop new technologies. You get a lot of money put into taking ideas and implementing them. Okay? So there are two phases of research development. There is the research phase, where we are coming up with whole new ideas. And then there's the development phase, where you take those ideas and you turn them into something useful in reality. So why we call it research and development, not just research. Not just development. Now the thing is, when you're in wartime, the money massively shifts to development. And suddenly a lot of ideas, which are very good, pretty much understood in terms of theory, but haven't yet been implemented because there's quite a big financial budget towards implementing them, are implemented and are developed. In peacetime, it's usually more of a balance, because people are looking for the next ideas, so there's still that cost barrier. So some of the things which we associate with being developed in the 1914-18 period would not be developed, because there wouldn't be the funding. But a lot of things will be researched. And you might actually see engine growth, when it's finally implemented, might actually be more quick. But it's probably going to take until the 1920s for it to really reach that density of development in terms of the war actually happening. Infrastructure kind of decides. Yes and no. One of the things you have to remember for the British is if you do not have the war in 1914, they are literally just about entering their next phase of infrastructure investment. So basically every 6 years, the British do a massive infrastructure upgrade around the empire. And you can track it. Every 6 years, they sort of go around and do massive investments. And it's implemented over about a 3 to 4 year period. And then they take 2 years off, survey, and then they invest in it. So literally, you're talking about the dockyards being built, which would have been many more dockyards being built and upgraded. That would take things like hood-sized ships. Would have been the next investment round. And then the thing is, you probably don't, that's going to be an investment round before you get to the 1920s. The next one is going to be scheduled for about 1921. So that's the thing for the Brits. When we're talking about other powers, again, the French are investing in growing their dry docks in their facilities, so they're growing them. The Italians are, the Germans are, the Americans are investing mass in dry docks in those facilities. So that's all going on. We're not talking about 300,000-ton battleships, though. Please, no, I'm not talking about that. We're talking probably 40 to 60,000 tons. So they're not going to be as massive as we sometimes think. They're not going to be 100,000, 200,000 ton ships. They're not going to be that massive. And that's probably going to have a limitation on the number of guns they carry. Logistics is going to be a nightmare with all that range of guns it does. Now the thing is, again, the British have a massive destroyer program going on, so just expect that to continue. It is massive, and the same with the British submarine program. Again, I'm just clarifying one thing in my notes. I'm looking at my submarine fleets in 1914. Yep. The Royal Navy has 75 submarines in 1914. France has 50, and Germany has only 30. And expect the Royal Navy to continue doing this. Because you must remember, whilst the Royal Navy keeps telling everyone that submarines are... has some people who go out telling people that submarines should be banned, they're terrible, they're evil... the Royal Navy also invests heavily in submarines. It's the classic thing of, please don't do like we're doing and invest in these things. Now, the British could have got away on a naval capacity, in terms of warfighting capacity lines, with standardizing on 16.5-inch guns. They could have got away with that. But that might allow the Americans to build bigger than them, and have 18-inch, or even bigger than the 18-inch. And I'm fairly sure it is 18-inch going on Agincourt. And the British are not going to allow themselves to be built, for people to build them bigger. They're not going to. Now, the thing is, the 10-inch, the 12-inch, and the 13.5-inch gunships are their 22 battleships. And if you think about it, the British are talking about having potentially 14 and another 24, so about 38 ships in this scenario, which are built in that period. So probably those first 22 have gone off. They've either been given out to Dominion partners, they have been potentially been sold off for scrap, or stuck in reserve. Again, we're talking about the Royal Navy. They have like 60 pre-dreadnoughts at one point in reserve, in reserve forces. Okay, another Excel spreadsheet. Now, I think it's in... They had a fairly large number in reserve as well, but they had about 40 pre-dreadnoughts still in service at the beginning of World War I in 1914. So probably what you're going to see is a lot of these ships go down into reserve to cover them getting rid of the pre-dreadnoughts first. Come on. My wife insists on having a truck where you see mine's bigger. I understand the notion of big guns as a status symbol. Yeah, it literally is its status, okay? So basically, I wouldn't be surprised if you've got 16.5-inch gunships, and I wouldn't be surprised if they're the they're the bread and butter. I wouldn't be surprised if there's even a class of them in this period. But I think you're going to have 18 and 21-inch gun battleships being the dominant ones being built in this period, in the later period, in the sort of 1917-20 period. Now, again, when we're talking about 18-inch guns, they're usually firing at roughly around a minute. HMS Furious, though, when she was doing bombardment, was about every 3 to 4 minutes as a monitor, but that's possibly due to aiming the shot, and it's a very different turret system, etc. They had to support it rather than a full battle turret. Possibly it's going to be every 90 seconds you'll get a salvo of 18-inch guns. With 16.5-inch guns, you immediately pop into about 2 salvos a minute. You are still 16.5-inch has the same rate of fire as 16-inch. It's not a meaningful difference in terms of rate of fire. Now, when we start talking about all this, and we start considering all this, 21-inch guns, they have about the same rate of fire as an 18-inch. About the same, in theory. In theory, I say this because no one's ever actually put them to sea in practice. Because you start to have maneuver battles. And this is the point I would start to make about this. Because once you have faster battleships, you start to end up with a scenario where the line of battle makes less and less sense, and you're more likely to end up with task group operations. Why? When I am maneuvering a solid battle fleet at 21 knots, I can keep them all together. When I have ships doing 28 knots, and I'm trying to maintain a line, it is trying to maintain a convoy of lorries where 100 lorries is going together in a line, single file, at about 100 miles an hour. That's on a road, which isn't moving. The sea is constantly moving, trying to exert force, trying to push everyone around. Once you've got the ships, the capital ships at 28 knots, you've got to have the destroyers running around at 32 to keep up the cruisers and similar, all doing their sort of things. That's going to cause you trouble. It's going to cause you a lot of work. So you end up breaking up the line of battle. You end up breaking up into small task forces. And this sort of mitigates against 21-inch guns and larger guns in the end, because it's the rate of fire. When you've got a large fleet and rate of fire, you've got multiple ships to do the ranging with. You've got multiple ships spotting to fall the shot. You can you can make up for the fact that you have a slow rate of fire by the sheer volume of data you can receive for ranging for engagement. When you're operating at a smaller force, you don't have that option. So, yeah. That's going to be a problem. But also, then we have the Kaiserlich Marine, the German Navy. And I think they pop into the qualitative race. I think that's what they drop into. I think I think very much like the Bardens, the bands, they stop. They stop trying to play. They stop trying to do a quantitative race, and they go into the qualitative race. I think they're still going to have the problem of funding a balanced fleet. They're still not going to have enough cruisers by a long shot. They're still not going to be building anything other than torpedo boats. They're still not going to be building enough submarines. They're still not going to be. They're going to be trying to use probably Zeppelins, but that's still not that great for their ocean reconnaissance capability. And I think probably you do see something like the 20, the LA-20, because that's got a 16.5-inch gun. That probably comes out when the British are building, The problem for the Germans is if we go through and we actually do slip in the bands, the bands will be finishing construction and launching after the Agincourt will, and after the Francisco Caracciolo will be. So they'll be their ships, and then they'll be dealing with 28-knot ships. And yes, they've got battle cruisers. But the German battle cruisers are 27-knot ships. They're faster than the British battle line. They're an entire reason why they're used as justification for the Queen Elizabeth class, so that the Germans can't use their battle cruisers to turn the British battle line if the British battle cruisers are off doing other duties. But the fact is, they are not ships which want to go up against a 28-knot fast battleship. Something like, if Agincourt is the 18-inch gun version, or even the 15-inch gun version of Drac puts forward, she'll muller them. She will absolutely muller them. She would have the speed to keep up with them. She would have armor equivalent to Warspite, and we've seen the impacts which Warspite took at the Battle of Jutland, and how she kept going. how much damage she was hit with, and how she kept going. The fire control the Queen Elizabeth had in it was the finest fire control anyone in the world was pretty much getting for capital ship guns. There's a reason they managed to get the hits they do in World War One. Now, the big problem for the Germans is going to be the British gunnery, British shells, longer term. And the thing is, the British are doing enough testing with their shells that whilst they are slow to get to it, they will have got to it with plenty of time to fix their shell issue in terms of the fusing by 1920. Now, I think the Germans do go for a 16.5-inch gun ship. As I said, I think they try and go for a 16.5-inch gun ship because they're not going to have the money to go for a lot of them. They're going to be able to build probably 2 of them. And then they're going to have to jump up to the next one. They're probably going to go down to building 2 ships each generation because of the cost. Because it's going to have to be a 28-knot ship. Which means they're probably going to have to buy British turbines. Because that's what they have to do with most of their battlecruisers. They are probably going to have to try and figure out how to make it oil-fired. And that means they're probably going to have to get their boilers from someone. They might manage to build them in Germany. They might not. They might try and make it diesel-powered. They were looking at diesel. There is a potential they could be going for diesel-electric. But it will be an interesting time to see. G-Man, can someone help G-Man put their question into the Discord, into the chat bot? Because we've got a chess bot. Ah, you've done it yourself, G-Man. Thank you. That's good. It's been received. Thank you. There is a chat bot which collects all the questions and written by Runon, actually, who was in the chat earlier. A bot which takes all the questions and sticks them in Discord for me to go through, so they're all listed in the Discord server. And one of the reasons we do that is so that if people want to go back and see what the questions were, which I'm responding to, I know I read them out, but sometimes they want to read them, they're actually in the Discord server for you to go and look at them. They're not there forever, but they're there for quite a while. With this, it's going to be something, probably 16.5-inch gun, it's probably going to be roughly 8 guns, but it's also going to be trying to make it 28 knots. And you've captured, well, thank you for joining us this time, G-Man. And that's the thing. It's going to be a capable ship. There's no one who's going to sit there and go, you know what, that's a terrible ship because the British ones have 18-inch guns, but that's just got 16.5-inch guns. There's no one going to be like that. But there are a few people going to go, oh, you guys really have dropped out. And the thing is, I can see them still building a couple of ships every sort of year up until 1920, which means they probably get, sort of with a couple of ships that they're probably getting in 1 a year. They probably get 6 more capital ships in service by 1920, all laid down, and that's not going to be enough. They're going to be completely outclassed by that point. It's going to be a scenario of Britain's built, if they continue to go back to their sort of pre-dreadnought, sort of their sort of standard building rate for the time period, they're going to have built roughly 24 ships in that period. The Germans will have not. With that being said, now questions. Now, I will say this. I have 2 bonus slides which are going to appear in the premiere for this. When eventually comes out as a Saturday premiere, if you're watching that again, there's going to be more stuff added in. I'm going to add in I've got a few little points already worked out for it, which are going to make it worthwhile watching, but it's also going to have some bonus slides. Which is going to be including the Ottomans, and the Russians, and the Greeks, and the South American arms race, and the naval race, and talking about those as bonuses. Now, Jack G, they should just build the U-boats, really. Honestly, Holzendorf is the closest you have to an admiral who would be saying they needed to build more U-boats at this time, and even he's not leaning on them, because one of the problems is the German admirals do understand if they don't present the British with a one-dimensional threat, then they make the life easier for the Brits. And that's kind of what their problem actually in terms of World War One, because they do present the Brits with a bit of a one-dimensional threat in the case of their capital ships. A one-dimensional threat. Basically, let's put it this way. If the classic example is people go, well, World War Two, the Germans would have won World War Two if they had just put everything into U-boats. And then the question I ask is, which is cheaper to build? A U-boat, a Type 7 U-boat, or a Flower-class corvette? Which is easier to build? Then which is easier to crew? Which is easier to recover the crew from? Because people often think of, well, you have to chase down the German submarines. You don't. The German submarines are coming to you. You have to protect your convoys. A Flower-class corvette can do that. And a Flower-class corvette is cheap as chips for the British Empire to churn out in huge quantities. And they do. And it's the same with the Hunt-class escort destroyers and all the other things that come in. So basically, if you present Britain with just a one-dimensional threat, you actually make Britain's life easier. Because they can just turn around to one thing and go, bzzz, and produce lots of them. If you present we've got capital ships, so you need capital ships. We've got cruisers, so you need cruisers. We've got destroyers, we've got submarines, we've got a full spectrum threat. You make it far more difficult for people to manage. You never in warfare or never in deterrence want to be a single access threat, because you make yourself very easy to deal with. If you make yourself, let's put it this way, if my opponent was just focusing on drones and not building anything else and just going, I'm going to do everything by drone warfare, I would develop systems which could take out communications capabilities. I would focus on that. I would have that as part of my force structure. And then I would take out the comms the moment war began. And I'd go, I will deal with the people who are upset about militarizing space and all that later. It really doesn't bother me, because I have taken out your entire ability to fight a war. I'll go for it. What if they pumped out Type 21s? Well, they weren't building them until later in the war. By the time they got to Type 21s, that's a lot later in the war. But by the time you're dealing with Type 21s, if they pump them out, the British are pumping out frigates. Bay class, Lock class, all those things. And there's tons and tons of frigates, and that's what people don't realise. Again, there's a huge amount of frigates, which have better ASDIC, which have the various systems. They also got the Castle-class corvettes as well coming out. So, and Black Swan sloops and a fair number of those, and a few other things as well coming out, which are coming into service again in greater numbers, which are armed with the systems which can take out the Type 21s. Again, the Type 21 is great. It can proceed underwater. That's good. So it can avoid it can snorkel. It can do all these things. That's great. They've already got sniffers that are hunting for snorkels. They've got radars looking for when the snorkel comes up. And when it gets in submarine range, the convoy, it's detected by ASDIC. They'll be listening for it. It's still not silent. It's still not a modern, it's even definitely nowhere near as silent as a modern submarine. And it will get attacked by the escorts. So, yes, the Type 21 is often put up as this really dangerous and scary thing. And it would be if it was in service in 1939. But it's not. It's in service in 1945. And whilst the Type 21 gets a lot of people talking about, oh, this is a really cool submarine, not many people talk about, well, yeah, then there's the Bay-class frigates. And the Lock-class frigates, and these ASW frigates, which are the latest and greatest in the submarine hunting tool, which the British and the Americans and the other Canadians and Australians are mass-producing by the dozen. And a lot more of those end up in service. But they don't get the attention I've got for. That's the thing. When people want to talk about stuff, they talk about the cool thing, which is the submarine. People don't talk about the thing, which is basically going, hello, Mr. Submarine, you want to get to convoy? Hello, I'm here. And I go, hello. I have mortars and depth charges and very sensitive ASDIC to spot you. Hello. And you have to come to me to get to the convoy. That's the thing. I don't have to go, if I'm the frigate, I don't have to go hunting across the North Atlantic for you. I don't have to hunt you down. You are coming to me. You always have to remember that. People sometimes think about frigates and convoy escorts as if they are defenders on the football pitch. Everyone's been watching football. I think they call it soccer in America, but football in the rest of the world. That's why it's called FIFA. The thing is, it's not the defenders. They're more like the goalies. Okay? Think of them as the goalies. They're hunter-killer groups wandering around. They're the defenders. They're the ones which get surged onto the convoy when they need extra protection because of the intelligence. They're the ones which go out hunting. But the convoy escort, they're goalkeepers. And goalkeepers don't race out to come getting you. They wait for you to come to them, and then they take the ball off you. And that's their job. But let's open up the questions. Forgive me, I use football for it to annoy my countrymen. Yeah, I prefer rugby. That's the one I used to play. Oh. Also, the planes will have my... So, like a free safety in real football. In American football, yeah. Yeah, that's sort of kind of like that. So, this is the trouble again, if you think about it in your terms. Who gets the attention in newspapers? It's the strikers. It's the quarterbacks. Yes, I've got a towel to protect myself from sweating into my chair, because it's hot enough in here. It's not the goalies. It's not the free safeties. They don't get the attention. They do cool stuff, but they don't really get the same press. If you're to tackle, you don't get the same attention as the others. I know. I used to play prop in rugby, prop forward, which meant I was the big guy at the front of the scrum. Trust me. The ones who got the attention were all the fast runners and the person who usually had the rank of hooker. Again, you can look them up on rugby. It is an actual position. It's an actual position they play in. And they're usually the smaller, well, they say slightly smaller, slightly lighter guy who are actually held up by the props in the scrum. Again, they get the attention. They get the press. The props don't. And the props don't mind it, because usually we just enjoy being... Well, basically, we are people who are given license to squash others on the pitch. So, yeah. That's the fun thing about the Type 21s. Don't get me wrong, they have potential to be good boats, but even for something which is built with so much slave labour, it has issues with design standards. But yeah, they are the frigates don't get the attention. Now, Alexander von Karstein, in your opinion, what's the ugliest warship ever? I am contractually obliged, as a member of Shipshape crew, to point out that it is the Hoche, which is the ship which is recommended by our colleague, the Fleets of Oceans. But, yeah. To be honest, there are a few which are kind of interesting. The Soviets had some very interesting battleship plans, which looked really kind of weird. Honestly, the ship which I would be most scared by the sight of is if someone turned around to me and said, "Oh, you're going to spend 6 months on the Moskvas." Then I would really not be keen. But Hoche, yeah. Le Grand Hotel. I am not playing SMA with warships. For those who don't know, that's Snog, Marry, Avoid. My cousins call it SMA for some reason. Okay. Ploppy78. Would the delay in the start of war cause naval aircraft to be used in more offensive role? Probably. Honestly, the British are already looking at torpedo carrying aircraft in 1914, that sort of idea. Nothing comes about till the Sop of Cuckoo in about 1917-18, but the thing is, you probably get carriers and you probably would get torpedo carrying aircraft. And again, that is the interesting point, because whilst I did bring up bomb capability, torpedo carrying bomb carrying capability is one thing. Torpedo carrying, is getting closer to the ships and is trying to launch directly. So you need to be fast as well as able to carry a heavy load. Torpedo bombers need lift and stability. And that's actually technologically easier. So probably you'll see any fleet air arms which do develop in this sort of period, and there will be a few, will probably develop a torpedo-heavy focus. Because torpedo is a weapon which will potentially sink large ships. So basically, you'll see them looking at torpedo air aviation. Probably knowing the French, you'll get into a debate of, is a carrier versus a submarine versus a destroyer versus a torpedo boat a better use of this weapon than the torpedo? But, you know, it's going to be something along that. Matthew Keeling, why are you bringing out the paddle wheel monitors to the US Civil War? That's just cruel to them. And that most of them didn't have a choice. They were the best technology that they were fighting in an ugly war at the time. But also, yeah, some of them, they really, really did need to give them actually proper armor. G-Man, have you done a bit of video on the US, if the US Congress let the USN do what it actually wanted and properly enter the battleship race with full 4-ship classes, actual escorts act? That's a Q&A question, but I'll answer that now. No, I haven't done that yet. It's never been suggested as a patron topic. And I usually leave the alternate histories to patron suggestions. I don't usually create my own alternate histories. I leave them as patron suggestions because you all usually come with better questions than I probably would as an alternate history. Because my alternate histories would be probably really weird and infrastructure based. I know what I'm like, okay? I know what I'm like. But also I did have fun the other day with someone who said, why do you do alternate histories? And I said, I pointed out that I do quite a lot of consultancy work and basically predicting the future, and doing alternate histories is kind of like that. It's where you look at the evidence, look at the logic, and you're just trying to go, right, and so this is an estimate of what is likely to happen. This is a likelihood. And you're going to look at the range of political, economic, social, technological factors, and the geostrategic issues, and you're going to put this together, synthesize all that together, using that lovely buzzword phrase, which I both find strangely annoying, because I'm not making a chemical concoction, and strangely useful, because it tends to make people go, when they're really not sure what you're saying. So there's a trick for all of you. If you ever need to make yourself sound like you've done a lot of work to bosses who are being problematic, say, well, I've synthesized the information, and they'll go, oh, really? Yes, I do teach buzzwords as a way to avoid, a way to deal with bosses or clients. But no, it's a case of, yeah, that's why I like doing the alternate histories. And as you can say, as my feeling, you also can see more of what was inevitable and what was in actual history when you look at the alternatives. Well, yeah. And one of the things that's fun is going, okay, people go, World War I, the July crisis can never work out the way it is. Well, hang on, there's the Agadir crisis. And it does work out. But the difference is, during the Agadir, 1911, the British and French guns are on the ball, and they basically deploy soft power, economic power, to do the job for them, and a little bit of hard power, and it's basically a nice diplomatic resolution. The 1914 one doesn't have that scenario. Jacob, I see synergy everywhere in my company's press release. Ooh, synergies. Jack Ray, my managers know better than to ask me what I've done. They don't like drinking from a verbal fire hose. If I remember correctly, you're also the guy who has chocolates and sweets on his desk. So most managers who these days who I meet, who are obsessed with their gym figures and how they look on their various smartwatch apps, will probably be avoiding you for the sheer temptation of that actual nice food, because they're probably on some sort of crazy protein shake diet. I have yet to find ever, and I occasionally have to drink them for when I'm doing my recovery from double pneumonia, a decent tasting protein shake. They all taste terrible. I just go, I will eat my weight in steak before I have to drink this, please. Austria-Hungary pulls the trick of lay down later, finished earlier on the Caracola in this scenario. If the Austro-Hungarians did that, if somehow they changed the Erzat Monarchs to be 28-knot ships and get them finished earlier, then frankly it's going to have the same reaction as the Italians doing it, because the Italians are going to follow in, and it's just going to mean everyone's going to be, oh. But the thing is, even if the Austro-Hungarians try that, the British are going to try and beat that. So that's the thing. The British are trying to get there first. It just means the Austro-Hungarians potentially get there second, and that makes the Italians really, really annoyed. Yeah, agreed, Matthew Keeling. Basic chocolate milk is better for you than half the protein shakes are there anyway. Yep. Third up, how can you distinguish between a naval embargo and a naval blockade? If you take the US and Cuba, for instance, the Americans will insist it's an embargo and not a blockade. But it feels like even if there are foreign ships bound for Cuba, they don't pass through any of the US monsters, for instance, they will still block them, which feels more like a blockade to me. Okay, if you're blocking all ships, even those not from your flag, it is a blockade. If, however, you are allowing ships of nations through who haven't signed up to it, it's an embargo. So certain neutral nations can still get through. If their merchant ships other neutral nations can get through, it's technically an embargo. Technically, you're doing it by commercial player. Blockade is when everyone's stopped. Embargo is when you are honestly not trying to stop. Now, how did the interesting thing is the British in World War One again get around a lot of these issues by just buying whatever those nations are trying to deliver to them. So basically, the British turn up to Sweden and Norway and go, so, what's Germany want to buy? Well, we can't tell you that. We'll add a 0 onto the price. Well, they were going to buy this and this and this and this. Oh, very good. Thank you. Nitroglycerine. That is a fun chemical to muck around with. But yeah, so that's basically, it's theoretically, it's an embargo if it's a quarantine if it's done for medical reasons. It's an embargo if it's a commercial, economic reasons, and it's a blockade if no one can get through. Jacob, British flagships have been going to Cuba humanitarian aid. Sedaf, also, can you explain to me how dry bulk and dry container shipping have evolved over centuries? The International Maritime Organization maintains bulk carriers were developed in the 50s to carry large quantities of unpacked commodities like grains, coal, and iron ore. Others maintain bulk carriers have been around for centuries, since the days of sail. Okay, so... Right. What you're dealing with is the development of the tramp steamer versus the bulk carrier. And dispute over the actual form of the dry goods, whether the bulk carrier is carrying it all entirely in a hold full and is specialized in carrying just that material or just that sort of grain or whatever it's carrying, and the reality of it used to be quite a lot of them were carried in bags and sacks. So, tramp steamers used to do most of the transportation, okay? And they would take crates, cargo, crates, sacks, everything loaded up. But it was tended to be sacked up to the ship because it would either be craned aboard or it would be man-carried, man-hauled aboard. So literally, teams of workers would be carrying those sacks up. These days, most bulk carriers are loaded using mechanical means and are unloaded using mechanical means. So that is what we're talking about when we're talking about modern ships. Basically, it's the way they're carried. So most goods these days, we're talking about they'd either be carried in containers, or they'd be bulk, or they'd be drive-on. So drive-on, the ro-ro ships, that's what they're used to. They're often driving themselves on. They're car transporters, all those things, they drive on just cargo. Again, there's some liquid sort of in terms of fuels and those things, but when we're talking about bulk goods, they are going to be basically hosed into the ship, and most of them in terms of grain, etc. Occasionally they still use cranes, but these days we've mostly tried to move beyond that because of the sheer quantity and efficiency. But so again, you're dealing with, there was a transition period where some of the older vessels were being able to use with the newer systems, so therefore you could go, well, hang on, they had a bulk carrier then, but that really wasn't a bulk carrier. So I hope that answers it. In the case of coal, bulkers have been around since the age of wooden ship hulls and used. Not necessarily. They're not. They're not. Their coal ships are slightly different from bulkers. Okay. Yes, you're right. Grains only moved to bulk when the hulls became metal, but also when the material. Also, it's Jacob. You have to think it's not just when the hulls became metal. It's also when the facilities came to upload and load these things in the quantities you're talking about, the vast quantities you're talking about. And with coal was moved as stowage, not bulk, and was moved in that fashion because, again, they had the methodologies of loading and unloading it. But again, it was quite often was sacked as well. Why? Because of the quantity you're going to need to move around. Not all ports can offload coal in that quantity. Coal is fun and games until your ship turns into a Monday fire ship. Yeah, coal dust is a nightmare to deal with. It was slightly better in wet wooden hulls, but we'll leave that to one side. But said after, the IMO are a fun organisation, and they are... Okay, in my approach to history, you might notice I'm often vague and woolly about dates, because I'll talk about transition periods. The IMO does not believe in transition periods. They believe in it happened at this date, and it moved on to this date, and it moved on to that, and that, and that. The reality is history is very much woolly and fuzzy, because, yeah, the big ports might have moved on to X and Y and Z because they might have the systems by that date, but the smaller ports might not have that system yet, and you still need to get coal there, or still need to get grain there, and you still think... So, often these things are a transition period. You know, just look at how long it takes to implement containerization. Containerization does not take place overnight, despite the people who talk like, oh, containerization happened and the world went boom. It didn't. Take ages. Look at how long it takes to get container ports actually built up and properly. You know? The London Gateway, which is the big port of London for containers, which was built at along. So it's to provide London with a deep water port, and it's not far from Harwich, isn't it? Yeah, not far. It's opposite. Because I was watching it, wasn't it? Yes. Anyway, the thing is, that was only finished, I think, in 2013. Yeah. And there's a lot of other places like that. And containerization is not even finished. There are still places opening up and container ports. So this is the thing: is this stuff takes time. There is usually a transition page. So anytime someone gives you a firm date and goes, "It was all done by this date," they are probably wrong. Verdun, we do not talk... You don't talk about London Gateway because I mentioned I find it funny. London Gateway expansion has so many fun issues with it. Really. The amount of stuff they managed to muck up the planning of that thing. Harrigan, what role would Von Trapp have played in this war? Would he still be a submarine officer, or would he become a staff officer? He's probably gone on to become a ship officer. He's probably commanding a ship. Probably a cruiser or something like that, considering his ranks. It's 6 years further on. He's probably that much senior. Up. Chandra, seriously now, is the unreliability of French shells the fault of the Junocoeur? Not really, per se. It's more because... It's not so much a fall to Junocol from its ideology, it's a fall to Junocol because of the debates created and the fighting over it, and the fighting over testing, and the fact that every testing turned into a battlefield, that, especially for big ships guns, that it basically took time to recover and catch up. And the trouble is, when you're trying to catch up quickly, sometimes you skip testing, and then you find out later that you shouldn't have skipped testing. London Gateway is that's why it's called the Gateway, mate, Jacob. It's not near London. It's the gateway to London. Marcus Anderson, with the 8-8 plan, what would the other 4 battlecruisers look like? Improved Congos? That's pretty much what they're heading for. Basically, you're going to get 4 Fuzos. Then you're probably going to get improved Fuzos. Then you're probably going to get improved Congos. And then you're going to get the next capital ships. And again, what you cannot believe is because of the 8-8 plan, they're only going to have 8 of each. They're not. They're going to keep some more in service. Mark Worthington, 1.1 inch in Mark 14 syndrome. Yeah, that happens more often than we'd like to think. 96831, I was wondering on the German U-boat severely damaged the British trade network. Can we say that was a lot to do with why Japan and USA's economies suffer as badly as it did? Yeah, that does have an impact, and then it takes time for them to rebuild afterwards. And whereas the Americans have the merchant fleet to rebuild their economy and have been rebuilding it and rebuilding their section trade network even during World War I, the Japanese didn't. That's a big impact. Because again, a lot of Japanese trade had gone on British merchant hulls. Runon, coming in late, so maybe missing context, but with the delay of Jutland and thus the shadow of the battlecruisers popping left, right, and centre, did Lexingtons get built, and does the US build a battlecruiser line? Probably the US does end up building some battlecruisers. The question is, they might actually skip straight to fast battleships, though. And that's the thing, they might skip straight to fast battleships, because in this scenario, the next generation of British capital ships after the R's are probably going to be fast battleships. As said, the Francisco Cacaros are coming, the Japanese are looking at the sort of the line, they're looking at 23, 25 knot ships. The British are looking at 28 knot ships. The British have been looking at a 28 knot design for about the last 3 generations by this point. Not including Queen Elizabeth's, which were going to be 28 knots, then they realised they would have to include small tube boilers, and that was one change too far, so they went for 25-ish knots. Yeah. It was fun. We'll see what the Americans do, but I think they do have probably some fast battleships at this point. If the US needs to build a new fast battle line, could they perhaps save some money on large cruisers, battlecruisers by recycling main battery guns and turrets from old standards? aka vanguarding. They might do that if they decide to build battlecruisers. But as I said, I think they probably just go with fast battleships and try and save money by not building both. Just remember, the US had a huge battle to try and get any battlecruisers built, because their politicians really didn't want to pay for them. Carl goes with Italian-style major refits for old USN standards. Again, the refits are more of a product of the treaty system than they are a product of much thinking and thought at the time. And even the US government might not want to go down the refit road. They might, but it's going to cost a lot of money, and it's going to be quite technologically a challenge, and it almost possibly works out cheaper to build a new battleship. And a new battleship is better. And again, I hate to use the US government's own Congress's and government's track record against them, but let's be honest, they tend to be happier about providing money for new stuff than they do refitting old stuff. Just look at the political fights around ordering new carriers versus when they have to go for when those carriers have to go for refueling and upgrade, and the fight over the cost for them. Again, cruisers. Lots of things have suffered from the same issue. Wayne's Water Sunset, could you see Brazil or Argentina ordering improved Argentores if Argencore is built how you think she'd be built? Probably not in the first generation afterwards, but who knows? Maybe along the lines. The British certainly wouldn't be mind about doing it, because it would wind up everyone else. Bruno, stop trying to make quantum brew ships a thing. There is no, there's going to be no quantum brew ships. There will never be quantum. Look, just because the British government turned quantum into the buzzword for the defence investment plan does not mean I have to exist with quantum in my life. But if one of the semi-dread launches with triples instead of twins, but still has triple expansion, or is otherwise lacking the full set, does that impact us on naval race? You're thinking of the South Carolinians. Probably not. But the interesting thing is, if you do have triple turrets entering earlier, which they could do, okay. So the first triple turrets are being theorised and being worked on in the 1890s. Yeah, they're back that far. For battleship guns. And the British, the Americans, lots of people do consider them. There is a possibility that you end up with triple turrets on pre-dreadnoughts. And if you change the pre-dreadnought period, there was a really interesting thing, because if you have the triple turrets, you can't have the wing turrets. So you have to go for the super firing on the dreadnought, which would actually mean HMS Dreadnought would be longer, because to accommodate her 15 guns by this point, but would actually be narrower as well, because she wouldn't have the wings of a twin 6-inch. So she'd be narrow beam but longer, which actually probably means she works out faster, which means you possibly end up with a 24 knot HMS Dreadnought. And so if the Americans had gone triples and... which was the class of pre-dreads which they were considering going triples for? It was... looking through my list of American battleships. Oh, why do I have a little Excel spreadsheet of American battleships? Well, I have an Excel spreadsheet of pretty much everyone's battleships. I think it was the Kearsarges they were considering it for, those ones built in the 1890s, because they went with they were the ones which had the funny guns on the top, weren't they? The Kearsarges had the 13-inch main guns, and then they had a secondary gun mounted on the top, if I remember correctly, on the top of the turret. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. And those were the ones which they were considering, they considered a triple turret for. But they went with the super firing, well, the gun on top of gun arrangement. But yeah, that would have been an interesting... Sorry, the Americans had gone triple at that point, then that would have probably had an impact on everyone else, and everyone else might have ended up going triple early as well. G-Man, where can we potentially find a copy of some of these spreadsheets? These sound very useful things I normally look up into on a regular basis. I'd have to put them up online somewhere, but it sounds terrible, but when I was younger at one point, I lost about a summer when I was about 10 years old to whooping cough. I had whooping cough, and I basically did nothing. And I basically built spreadsheets of everything in that period. I used my dad's old laptop, and I've upgraded them. Every time a new generation of Excel comes out, I make sure to migrate them across to the new variants and make sure they're okay and all okay. But there is literally... Let's put it this way. To quote one of my cousins who's an accountant, I have enough Excel spreadsheets that even she feels embarrassed when she comes here. Okay. Wayne's Water Signs Attack. Do you think we see 30-inch guns by no? I don't think. I think there is a practical limit. There is a limit at which the rate of fire gets so low that it's problematic. Do I know about Sea Power N? Is it a game? And if so, it could be on my list of games. Naval combat. There's a lot to know about Sea Power naval combat. You had premature questionation. Does the Sea Power naval combat in the Missile Age, or is it likely to trigger the raid on something that is classified, privately told info? I do know about it. I haven't played it much yet, but that's also because, in a nice way, I've been building a house. I'm only hearing more reasons for them to be posted. Yes. At some point, Jack Ray is currently setting up a lovely website for this channel that gives you details of things to go and find stuff on the website on the channel, which is really nice of him. And I'm going to say thank you again, because hoping he's listening to someone, I can say thank you to him for it. But I do need to at some point actually put together a proper website of all the stuff, and I might put the Excel spreadsheets up on there, or at least some of them, some of the Excel spreadsheets and weird spreadsheets I have. Probably a lot of the stuff on the treaty era spreadsheets would be pretty useful for people. G-Man, just joined. Not sure if I already answered. In a delayed war scenario like this, without dropping the consequences, how doesn't ship design change compared to RL ship designs? Probably it's more a delayed construction. It's going to be a phased construction and ideas and thinking things through. But I think the thing you're probably going to see is there is a scenario where battle cruisers try and race ahead to justify them. So they try and go up to 32. If the battleship line has got to 28 knots, the battle cruiser are going to try and get to 36 knots. Because again, it's basically, think about the British battle cruisers. They went 28 knots when the rail line went 21 knots. You're going to want a 7, 8, and a 7 knot advantage over a battle line. Going to 35 knots, it's again one of those points which is weird. 36 knots usually works out better, so 32 knots, 36 knots, you're probably aiming for the 36, and that gives you useful things. Doc didn't get sponsored by Squarespace yet? No, I don't. I haven't been sponsored by Squarespace. We went over this. The only people I have had a mild sponsorship deal, and I've got to send them details of, is the people who the cruiser book, and literally that was more about competing between me and Giglio from Italian Military Archives over who would sell the most, because we knew we'd both lose to Drac. It was lovely, but yeah. It's a good book. Actually, have I sent them the details? Oh, I might not send them the details. I'll check. After this video. Waterburst. If there's no war till 1920, does the Austrian guy stick with painting? Who knows? Honestly, that is a whole other thing. But the thing is, he'll be 6 years older. Lots of people will be 6 years older by 1920, so things will be different. So, El Guapo. Yeah, so if one wants to know, how would anti-ship technology progress, like hydrophones in the Aztec? They're already working on those things, so there is the possibility that by 1920 they're in service. There is a possibility. Historically, the British do have some version of it in service by 1918. And the work is understood and was being worked on before then. Honestly, it starts working. There's the Royal Navy starts mucking around with stuff which is sort of heading down that line in 1914-ish. In 1916, it's put under the Board of Invention Research. So potentially you do actually have something in service, or something coming close to service by 1920. Nice things for one. As with what you said, the question occurred to me. So, how overblown has the January 1914 scandal involving Siemens and Vickers and two admirals in the IJN become in the 110 years since it happened? It's a lot bigger considering what happens in World War One and the events of afterwards than it is at the time. G-Man, have you answered that one? Eddie Rudolph. As I basically said, that's what Patreon's for. And I enjoy Patreon questions coming. Currently taking in the ones for October and November. Eddie Rudolph, could the Germans have used the Austrian triple turrets if the war had waited? Potentially they could have done. They did look at them. They decided not to go with them, but they did look at them. G-Man, where can we potentially find a copy of some of these spreadsheets? Answer that one. I haven't yet put them up anywhere. Does the doc have a full spreadsheet for Iron Ships and Service on VJ Day? Yes, somewhere I do. I basically, what you're talking about is the pink slips. Okay, the Royal Navy maintains pink slips in National Archives. You can get them. You can actually, I think you can download, but certainly get them digitally sent to you from the National Archives. And they have pink slips of day by day, the day by day lists of ships and what are in service, what they're doing, and where they are in the world. And they're fairly accurate. They're basically the Royal Navy's almost diary of what's going on and which ships are where and what they're doing. So yeah, I have most of the pink slips for World War II in my collection of documents I've photographed in the National Archives, but I think you can get them directly from the National Archives in better, in better form than my pictures, because my pictures were taken by myself with my own camera rather than by the lovely people in the National Archives who have the very fancy cameras. Because those were mostly taken in the days when I was doing my PhD research, and whilst I did well in my PhD, I did not have the research funding which, thanks to all you, I now have. Yeah, Japanese governments get brought down by a lot, though, in that period at night. Say enough, why doesn't Britain use privateers anymore? Lawyers. It's expensive, and you have to do so many legal things, it's obscene. Aim Clarke, which of these potential navies is your favourite, best setup for the future? Okay. So, I think there's been questions about... Jake Grant, you've got a question about battle cruisers. Can someone make sure that's added into the system so I won't lose that? So that's the exclamation mark Q&A. Which of these potential navies is your favourite best setup for the future? Okay, so here's the thing. I have soft spots for the IJN and the Italian navies. I do, they're really fun. I think Congress is going to sufficiently hamper the US Navy in this scenario, especially about World War I staring down their throat, that things are going to be an absolute bun fight for the US Navy. The Royal Navy is probably going to be the best setup because of the sheer quantity they're going to build. But in terms of the best setup for their size and getting value for money, I'm probably going to go for the Austro-Hungarians. Because for their value for money, they're getting a very good fleet. For size, they're getting a really good fleet. Thank you, Jacob. Oh, is the data from all those pink slips also available in a single spreadsheet? Look, the fact that it was during my PhD years, when I was in my 20s, if I admit I spent that much time with an Excel spreadsheet, just copying, just typing the data across and putting in a spreadsheet, that starts to sound like I had no life. Okay? So don't ask me that question. Don't ask me that question. That's not nice. Thanks, let's do the conversion. Knights, everyone. Can we compare the 21-inch gun battleship for the proposed 170 to the proposed 170 gun fourth deck first rate HMS Duke of Kent from the HSL? Yes and no. Yes, to an extent, this is going to be a status symbol. No, because it's more likely to actually get built than Duke of Kent was. Oh god. I spent way too much time in spreadsheets. Question from Jake Grant. Do you really think scouting group battlecruisers would be useful when the main battle line is so fast already? Okay, so the point is, I think at a certain point, the scouting group of battlecruisers moves out and stops being the scouting group. And I think they become the trade protection / rapid reaction force. Remember I talked about a task force style world? Yeah, I could see the battle cruisers basically becoming Britain's rapid reaction force. And Britain would have the idea of they'd have the reason why Britain probably does end up with those ships is they would want a battle squadron in the North Atlantic, they want a battle squadron in the Mediterranean, and they'd want one in the Indian Ocean. And they'd want some battle cruisers as their rapid reactions force to reinforce going around. So basically, they'd have the battle cruisers as the force probably based in the Mediterranean and maybe at home, so it's where it's cheaper to base them. And their whole idea would be they surge to wherever they need to be to reinforce. So you go from, we have a battle squadron of 8, 9 battleships, and we have the battle cruisers here. So think about that, and also think about it in terms of task forces, in terms of economic warfare. Hunting down as solo commerce protection / commerce raiding assets. You have to remember the same things which make a ship excellent for commerce protection, i.e. like a town class cruiser in World War II, also make it very good as a commerce raider, like a town class cruiser in World War II. We all have to remember what HMS Liverpool did off the coast of Japan, where she literally intercepts one of the pride of the Japanese navies in terms of their merchant marine, their liners, and goes, "Hello, we hear you have some Germans aboard, we'd like them now. But there's the Japanese coast, don't care." Do those battleships for go back to Lotus or Quattro Pro, or just to Excel? They mostly go back to Excel. I was only born in 1987. And I started doing them when I was 9, 10, about 19 in the 1990s, and my dad's laptop ran them. I think it was always Windows. My dad was a very good naval architect, as I talked about before, and actually did a whole load of development of the technology and computer systems you use to design ships and CAD for ships. But he hated, with a passion, having to convert files for anyone. So he used a standard basic system for pretty much everything. As his the standard at the time was Excel. So yeah, that's what he had. But, yeah. So basically, don't consider battlecruisers a scouting group. Consider them a rapid reaction force / commerce warfare assets. Loudwood, hello. What innovations do you think we would not have seen if these ships had gone to war as said in this video? And what innovations do you think would have been skipped? As said, I think you end up with the fast battleship. I also think you end up with Jackie Fisher getting a different memory in history, because he doesn't get his second term as First Sea Lord. So you don't have that impact on the Royal Navy's development. So I think you don't get the renowns, you don't get things like that sort of scenario. So that means the battle cruisers, you might not get a 15-inch gun in battle cruiser. I think there is a good possibility you don't get a 15-inch gun ship in the battle cruiser generation. I think they're all in the 15th generation. I don't think you get battle cruisers from the Royal Navy, and so you don't get the renowns, and I don't think you get the admirals. I think by the time they get onto the admirals, they are sort of admiral generation. They are fast battleships, and actually fast battleships. To that extent, I wouldn't be surprised if by the 1920s there are basically no battle cruisers around in terms of main theatres. If they are there, as said, they've gone to very fast, rapid reaction force. But, you know. What's the name of the streamer you mentioned earlier? Thunder Chaser Gaming. Really nice guy. But innovations, I think potentially you also skip the idea of launching aircraft from ships' gun turrets as an actual thing on the actual warships. It's going to probably be done in testing, but I don't think they're actually going to do it because it's not going to be the exegesis of war. I think you're going to have aircraft carriers in service before 1920, and you're going to be going there. I'd also say with the other problem you have for battle cruisers is with the size of the guns growing. Whilst the lovely Jackie Fisher might have the ideas for the incomparable, other people do not like the idea of putting out what is basically a glass cannon. Other people do not like that. So, dumb question, but how come there is an annual Secret Service vote at Westminster, but there's much less secrecy about defence spending? Because, frankly, we have to declare our budget as part of NATO, and because, honestly, it's quite a big department of government and quite a big department of spending, so it's going to be talked about. But yeah, the Secret Service vote is always a fun time to spot. I'm not sure if it's annual though. I think it's biannual. How much of the pre-1914 RN fleet will still be around if war breaks out in 1920? Probably all of it's around in terms of the dreadnoughts. I don't think the pre-dreadnoughts are around. Again, before people sort of think that's weird, I think the 12-inch guns and ships are still around. I think the Lord Nelsons are probably still around because, A, they're going to be not that old. They're going to be 15 years old, so they're not really there for the things. There might even be the King Edward VII's and Cutran Londons around. But the thing is, they are going to be in reserve. They're going to be reserve ships. They're going to be there to activate in real times of war. That's another scenario, because, yeah, a lot of the pre-dreadnoughts are going to go gone before the dreadnoughts go. They're going to be either sold, so the dreadnoughts are either going to be sold to Dominions, or they're going to be in reserve. The older ones, the 12-inch ones. Would there have been any consideration of quintuple and sextuple main gun turrets? People always want to consider them, but okay. So the rule of thumb I always give is, if you have one gun, you have 1x problems. If you have 2 guns, you have 3x problems in a turret. Okay? If you have 3 guns, well, you have problems with this gun, problems with this gun, problems with this gun, problems with this gun with this one, problems with this gun with this one, and problems with this gun with this one, and vice versa. You have 6x problems. Quadruple, you worked out the thing, it goes up again. And quintuple, sextuple, you suddenly got a huge amount of problems, because the thing that causes most problems in guns, and I've talked about this in the artillery, in the Iron Fist video, which I did on Sunday when I did an Iron Nest, when I did is that when you fire one gun, it's going to disrupt the other gun. If you got 6 guns in there firing, they're going to disrupt each other something funny. King of England, how would HMS Eagle in his carrier affect this alternate Jutland? Well, Jutland might not be happy, but it wouldn't be Eagle. Eagle would be off being a Chilean battleship. It would be Hermes and versions like her. That's what the British were working towards building. So there wouldn't be a conversions in this scenario, they'd probably be purpose-built carriers. So there'd be something like Hermes, potentially built bigger than Hermes. Again, please note why I'm saying this. Because it's going to be a Hermes potentially designed with the idea of being of carrying torpedoes and torpedo bombers. Because the torpedo bomber aircraft is already in the development, and by the time they get around to ordering the carrier, it's probably going to be about 1916, and that means you might already have a torpedo carrying aircraft which they want to launch and recover on it, which is going to require space, because that thing's going to be, depending on its wings, which are going to be massive for it to get enough lift. with that being said, I'm going to turn the questions off because we have almost got to 4 hours. And I'm going to go check on everyone. And then I'm going to turn up in Discord for a chat if people want to chat in Discord for a bit. What have we got coming up? This week we have got Claiming Mare Nostrum, the Reggio Marina's destroyers in 1929-30s. At the beginning of this week we had the Japanese destroyers in World War One. Sorry it came out on Wednesday. It was just so frigging hot I didn't manage to record it till Wednesday morning when it was cooler. And the week after that we have the Kriegsmarine. Not back 2 for every step they take. Yeah, World War II. Kriegsmarines destroyers in World War II is a fun time for them. It really is. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. And thank you. And take care. And if you've waited this long and is still here, there's a little bonus for you. Ottoman Empire and Greece. Now, Salamis probably gets built, and the Ottomans probably do build their capital ships in this scenario, but they're going to be very quickly outclassed by everyone else's. So it's kind of going to be an interesting race, as the Greeks are probably going to permanently be ordering less ships than the Ottomans. The Ottomans trying to go more ships. There is a really interesting scenario in this thing where the Ottomans actually go bankrupt trying to keep up with the Greeks for the dreadnought race. And the thing is, for the Ottomans, it's not just about the Greeks, it's also about the Russians. Because the Russians are also building up a Black Sea fleet. So if the Ottomans can't build up capital ships and dreadnought capital ships, they are going to be snookered from one side or the other. So what you could see, and this is potentially the starting point of a war in 1920, is actually the Ottoman Empire disintegrating into civil war. And different states trying to move in to claim their bits of it. That could actually be the reason for it. Thought I'd finish on a little bonus. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. And if you liked the video, please do like, share, and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow. And thank you. This was live. Thank you. And we are literally 10 minutes short of 4 hours. Yeah, no more questions on the chat. Take care, everyone.